Ready? Go!
Oh, power of kings! We finished Metaphor.
Yeah,
What did you think?
it
Yeah.
was good. Honestly, my favorite like quote thing that I found in that is whenever you're Stroll and you use like light magic, he's like, "Oh, holy light!" I like that.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, and I used that a lot because I had the savior archetype
yeah,
unlocked. That
same.
was really fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. This is our final destination. We decided, in lieu of me just reading a review that I wrote, we're just going to commiserate about it because we both finished it, and we both haven't played the same things all year, so this is an opportunity to do that. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited to get into it. I don't know how long we'll go. We could go on for a long time, I'm sure, because it's my game of the year, and I'm sure it's probably yours.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's just it probably is. So, if you say it is, it is. And we're going to get into the game of the year discussion, but on a different podcast. This is our review kind of spoiler cast. So we're no holds barred. If you're here, you are listening for everything metaphor.
Yeah.
So, if you haven't finished metaphor, if you're kind of playing it, if you've yet to start it, I don't recommend it until you hit credits. I just don't. I mean, there's plenty to see, plenty to do. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Noah?
Yeah, yeah, we're gonna talk about everything in the game. So, but
Hmm.
we we're both really passionate about this game. We're both hot off the heels off
Hmm.
it, and we both
Yeah.
really enjoyed it. And so we're gonna
Hmm.
get into some pretty specifics, I think, of game details and story beats, things like that. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully my internet doesn't crash. I was having internet problems before this. So fingers crossed that persists. Well, the good connection persists throughout this pod. But yeah, I guess where do you want to start? Do you want to just give me your high level thoughts about finishing the game? So first off, I finished this game around Thanksgiving, I want to say. I want to say I did finish it like the week of Thanksgiving, like on that Tuesday or something. You had started and finished it in like 2 weeks. Like you really busted ass through this thing.
yeah,
So yeah, I guess you finished it what, in the last week, or has it been 2 weeks at this point?
it's been the last week. Yeah,
Last week, okay. Yeah, I guess yeah. I've talked about it kind of at length from finishing it. I want to know your thoughts having finished it, and just say what you want. I mean, we're here, so.
yeah. I mean, I think that it does that sort of persona time management, and you have a party, you run through dungeons. I think this is just I'm just gonna say this is the best of that formula, right?
Formula. Yeah, definitely, 100%. Yeah, it's. I agree. I think ultimately the thing that pushes it over the top is the characterization
Yeah.
being the best they've done with these types of characters. I don't know if you agree or not, but
Yeah, I really enjoy that having that um, sort of persona battle system mixed with a more traditional JRPG job system that
yes.
feels right to me. Like I don't dislike the persona battle system, but I just like this better because I like job systems better. That's kind of my favorite sort of
I definitely do
RPG
too. I
system.
prefer
So
it, yeah.
yeah,
I prefer it over like having that collection aspect. Like I like collecting personas. It's fun, but they feel like expendable in a way.
yeah,
In metaphor, everything feels invested in, so
mm,
you have vested interest in using the different jobs, right?
yeah.
And in persona, you're getting a Jack Frost and you're doing a Bufu. Like
Yeah, and then Jack
it's just
Frost is
not the
gonna go
same,
away because he falls off
right?
after like a couple levels. He's not good anymore. And then you never see
Exactly.
him again. Goodbye, Jack Frost.
Yeah, the thing about the archetypes is they persist and are good throughout the game, no matter what level they're at. Even in their different trees, like some levels of an archetype are better than others for different situations. You can even
Yeah.
scale up and down, for instance, because one class has a better perk than this one does, and this one has a better perk than this one does, right?
Yeah.
Even in the same tree. So,
Yep.
yeah, I think I agree with you there for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
The archetype system is probably my favorite job system in any game, any JRPG, and I played a fair amount. The one that brings to mind is Final Fantasy VI specifically. The job system being there, and five really. Um, it's you can select in metaphor you could select from a million different trees. Every character has their class specific one, along with their royal archetype, which is basically like their final nth degree of their class specific archetype. And I didn't get to unlock every one of them,
Yeah.
but I unlocked about two or three of them by the time I finished the game, and I was just man. Every time you get down their tree, you're like, okay, this is getting better and better and better. And by the time you get to the end, you're like, man, this is pretty shoot hot. I love this.
Yeah. I was able to unlock 4 of them, but
Four of them. Okay.
because
Okay. So who did you unlock it on?
yeah. So first I unlocked it on Juna, and
Yeah.
then on Yufa. Those were like the two like easiest to unlock it on, so I just kind of did that.
Yeah.
And then I think I unlocked it on Heisme next,
Mm.
and then I unlocked it on Basilio was the last one I got
Okay.
to unlock the Royal Archetype for. But yeah, I didn't have Hulkenberg and Stroll in like the correct roles, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
to unlock them, because like they want you to do a lot of magic classes with Hulkenberg to get hers, and she's not
Right.
really her stats don't lend her well to magic in my opinion. So
She's more defense and like I guess like weakness based. Like she's more defense than anything, I would say.
yeah,
So like that or she's really good for buffs. Like if you use a commander class on her, she's really
yeah,
good for that. Um, but yeah, for sure. Like it's the archetype stuff. There is some shortcomings for sure. I feel like they could have done more with like the sniper tree. They could have done another level to that. They only have like two for a couple. Some archetype trees have less levels than others, where I wanted to see more
the
in one tree compared. So.
yeah, the sniper tree did have 3 levels, but
Oh, did it? Okay, I must have
yeah,
just not unlocked it past. Okay, that's
yeah,
probably on me then.
yeah, I think you have to be rank 8 with Nurse to get that.
That's okay.
Um,
There it is. I didn't finish that bond. I think
okay,
that was one of the only ones I didn't finish. So I was like, "There's only two to this," but I should have known that there was another hex there.
yeah,
So
but the Dragoon class is pretty underwhelming to be honest.
is it
I've
okay?
I've spec'd into it. I've never actually used it, but just like looking at the like what it does and what skills it gives, I've never like seen use of the skills for that in my builds at least. So
Gotcha. So kind of like top of the line play time. It took you. Was it? You said 56 or was it 60?
57.
57. Okay, sorry. Yeah, you
Yeah.
mentioned it the other day, and I was trying to remember off the top of my head. It took me about 72, and it was. I wasn't like. It wasn't like. It just felt natural. It didn't feel like I was like going too short or too long on anything.
Yeah.
I felt like I was taking my time and just. It felt like a normal occurrence. I think from any playthrough, it's going to be about 60 to 70. It depends. Some people are just slower than others, right? I was pretty methodical. I was poking through every piece of the dungeon, every piece of dungeon I could, attacking pretty much every battle I took on to. I didn't run away from a lot of fights, and that
Yeah.
probably pads it out a little bit because when you're in a dungeon, you are fighting a lot, especially later on. Like the final dungeons, especially on the road up to Luis, there's a lot of enemies. A lot of enemies.
Yeah.
And it's a great place to grind, honestly.
hmm
So,
I just kind of ran past like that. I just skipped that entire dungeon on the road up to Luis the first like time I went through it because it was like
I did
pretty late
two
at night.
for the secret boss. Yeah, I did two for the
Yeah,
secret boss. Yeah.
yeah, it was pretty late at night, so I'm like, I just don't even want to mess with this dungeon. I just want to go fight Luis, and so I just like walked past everything. But
Yeah, what sucks about that though, when it comes to like a trophy aspect, you can't be on storyteller to get that trophy, and that's kind of what I ended up finishing it on because I was just like, I just want to finish this. I still have a save like right there, so I can do that on normal, it was one of those things where like I had started it and there was such a difficulty spike on normal. I was like, I just want to kick it down and see the credits at this point. Like I'm there. I could do it and get this trophy. I just haven't yet. It's one of those things. I put Metaphor away after I finished it because I wanted to play more of it. But
Yeah, I did that
yeah,
same
there are
exact
some
thing.
major spikes. Hmm.
And then I actually gave it a couple days, and then I did decide to go back because I needed to do some sort of like grinding trophies,
Mm,
anyways. And
yeah.
so I'm like, oh yeah, I'll just grind up to get to around like level. I think I was like around level 90, not quite,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I was able to beat him on hard mode. So
On hard, good. Yeah. I don't think I even got close to 90. I got like level 75 with most people, I want to say.
yeah, and once you get to like
Yeah.
level like 77 ish, then all of the enemies in that place die instantly in
Mm,
that final dungeon. So then you just like go
interesting.
around and just like level up without doing battles. So it's kind of nice. There's actually
Okay, so
like
you're just engaging in. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, there's also one spawner for the tooth enemies, and there's like these giant tooth enemies
Mm,
that can rarely spawn in there, and they'll give
mm.
you like if you have like a archetype um like boosting archetype XP boosting item like the fortune
Okay.
gloves,
Yeah.
um
Yeah, yeah.
then you can get like 55 of the like boosting like the 1,000 archetype.
Oh, the leaves or
Yeah, the
whatever?
leaves. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can get like 55 of those at once,
Wow. When you're
which
at
is
77.
no, you don't even have to be at 77. That's um they'll
That's just the
spawn
best place
at
for them to spawn. Okay.
yeah, they'll spawn at any time. But 77 just
Interesting.
lets you go around the whole dungeon if you want to and kill anything without doing a battle
Okay.
except for
Yeah.
those giant teeth. Those giant teeth are like level 90, so
Interesting. Okay. That's really cool. Yeah, if I were to grind, I would probably go back and do that just to max everybody out. The only like trophy specific thing for archetypes, besides, I don't know if there's is there a trophy for getting everybody's royal archetypes? I don't actually
no.
know.
No.
Okay, there is like maxing out the archetype tree of the protagonist.
Yeah,
I
and
do
you
know
have to like
that.
actually master everything for the protagonist as well
Yes, you have
before
to
you
have
get
like
there.
actual master levels on
Yeah.
everything, which doesn't sound very hard. I almost got everything anyway.
It's
But
not. If you just fight those teeth, you'll be fine. It doesn't take
yeah, well,
long.
I
It
was
took
getting
like
it even
maybe an
without
hour.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I had the mastery levels, I was just going through, not even the final dungeon, but previous dungeons, and I was just getting a bunch of leaves. I was farming like 100 to 200 during a dungeon and just kind of putting them on my characters. Um, but yeah, I think the end of that game is real strong. I think the final confrontation is extremely cinematic. It gets a little Final Fantasy at the end where it's like, I'm going to become this crazy monstrosity, which I liked.
Yeah.
It feels like a trope. It does feel like a trope, but I think it's done really well, and I love the design of the secret boss. It's so
Mm-hmm.
cool. Um, yeah, Caradrius is just amazing looking.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I just think the entire game from start to finish, it feels like a complete, like a masterful somersault round off, and then a complete sticking the landing. You know, um, the end, like after you beat Luis, since we're kind of talking about spoilers, I don't know if they would they make a sequel. That's the real thing. I don't think so. It feels like
No.
one of those like ambiguous, we're going off into the sunset adventuring sort of things, because basically the game ends, everybody assumes their roles in the kingdom under you, and everyone kind of joins up on the gauntlet runner again, and they're like, let's go do stuff, other stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's your take on that?
I don't think they will do this cast again, but I could
Hmm.
see them. I know that I've seen like interviews where the creator of Metaphor wants Metaphor to become a series like a Shin Megami Tensei, like a Persona.
Yeah,
So I could see them doing another one in the same world. Um,
same world, which is what we've talked about too.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be, I think that would be the way to go. Personally, if I was a betting man, I think that will happen, and I think it'll happen. I think it should happen. Personally,
Yeah. I
um,
do think
yeah.
that there's going to be like a royal or a golden or
Yes.
a fess, whatever
There
version
definitely will
of
be. They will add a
Metaphor.
character. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that comes out on Switch too?
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
I would be shocked. I think there is even evidence of that. Um, like I, yeah, and we should talk about Switch 2 a little bit at some point. Let's get into it a little bit when it comes to Metaphor on new consoles. Um, I think with the Switch 2, which got announced today, um, I think everything's going to be on there as much as possible. It's a pretty powerful handheld, with rare exception. Like I don't think like next gen games are going to be on that thing,
Yeah.
but people are going to try their darndest to get ported to that. Um, and Metaphor feels like a PS3 game in some ways. It feels like you said, like some of the architecture of a Persona 5, which was also on PS3.
Yeah.
In some ways, it feels a little Persona 4-ish when it comes to kind of like not dungeon layout, but like dungeon stylings, where it's like this is the only detriment I really have for just the look of the game is the texturing and the models seem a little, you know, not underbaked, but they're like low res kind of. And some of it's a style. I definitely understand, but it feels like they're working around their limitations for as long as this game was baking. You know, this is the game that had been in development almost 8 years. It was announced. I think right after Persona 5, if not before, they said they were doing a project something, and it was this game.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't shock me if they kind of worked with their limitations and gussied it up after that, because that's what they're known for. They're known for, having a great embellishment and a great style to their games, right? Atlas does. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case, but I don't know about you.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with it.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I definitely want to talk about the Switch 2. We need to talk about the Switch 2. I don't know if this is the right place to do it,
No,
but
it's not.
we need to talk about it. It's not, almost certainly, but gosh, such a cool trailer. Metaphor being on the Switch 2, I think, is an eventuality. I don't know if they put Metaphor on there or if they
Yeah.
just do the Royal Edition or whatever.
I'm
They
thinking
might
the
just do
Royal
that.
Edition, yeah.
Yeah, because it'll be the perfect time, and it's not going to confuse the audience either. Because sometimes people go like, "What version should I buy?" Almost certainly they're going to put something out because that's just what they do. They don't they don't ship complete. They want you to buy their game again and play it again. And usually that version is better because they're taking into consideration, excuse me, quality of life improvements
Yeah.
and actual story changes and character changes. It feels in some ways like a improvement of the previous game, right? Which is only good in Metaphor's case. It is very annoying though. I will
Yeah.
grant it. You know, having a Royal Edition when you've just finished like Persona 5, which is like 100 hours, it can be a little taxing, right?
Yeah, that I still haven't been able to get through that Royal Edition of Persona 5. It's just such a long game. It's way
It's so
longer
long.
than
It's
Metaphor, yeah.
it's very good. Oh, it's
Yeah.
almost. Oh, in some ways, it can be twice as long as Metaphor.
Yeah.
If you are like, you feel like you're living in that world by the time you're done.
Mhm.
Um, in Metaphor, it feels like you're a visitor in some ways. Sometimes, it feels like you're passing through because you're kind of jumping from land to land, right?
Yep.
Um, but yeah, 72 hours for me, 57 for you. Um, yeah, I just feel like throughout, my time was just really rewarded. Everything I really, everything I wanted to do, excuse me, I did, with rare exception. I feel like I did miss some stuff. I didn't finish all the bonds, for instance, like Nuris and a couple others. It's just one of those things I just kind of ran out of time. I was doing all the virtue stuff. I did max out my virtues, but I should have gotten the bonds done first because they feed into your archetypes. Really, your virtues kind of help you with conversation. So if I was to do something over again, I would be getting my bonds upgraded first instead of my virtues. But you finished all the bonds, right?
Yeah, you do have to have level 5 virtues to get max rank on all the bonds, so.
Right. I just feel like I didn't optimize as well to be able to do anything because I feel like you could do everything the right way.
Yeah.
Um, I knew there were some days where I was missing things where, like, I feel like I wasted a day in a dungeon or something like that because I was making like a shred of progress here and there. I feel like I needed a guide in some ways. It was good figuring out for myself, but like if I was going to do it correctly, I'd probably follow a guide to go like I don't want to miss anything this go around because I've seen it already. So
Yeah.
so yeah, time being rewarded. That's like the number one thing because I get really really PO'd when my time gets wasted, especially in a long game like this. Um, and the highest praise I can give it is I wanted to play it again after I'd finished it. That's really it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're there with me on that,
No,
but
I am. Yeah.
yeah, I really it was very tough to delete that from my console, and that's kind of what I brought up in my review. I had to actually just remove it from my hard drive because I just all I wanted to do was play Metaphor, even by the end. So, yeah, I guess. Well, let's talk a little bit about characters. What ended up being your favorite party member or party members? For me, it's just Heisman because he's just all timer. Just he's an all timer. Heisman, I loved Basilio. I loved Basilio. That voice acting for Basilio was just loved it. What about you?
Yeah, I also really liked Heisme.
Hmm.
I really wish we had Fidelio as a
Yeah,
party member,
yeah,
but
yeah. You can see why they didn't though. But
I knew something was going to happen to him. Like I just knew it because I saw the axe on that guy's back, and I'm like, he's got a weapon, the other guy doesn't. This guy's gonna be our party member.
I didn't think about that. Yeah.
I was thinking that the
Well,
whole time that something bad's gonna
yeah.
happen to Fidelio, and I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, I hate this so much. And then it's like gives you false hope. Like you can do certain like things with party members, and so I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go talk to Fidelio here for this day instead of talking to anyone else,
Hmm.
And but it's nope, it didn't
Yeah.
amount to anything. So
Yeah, that might be like the emotional. That might be the emotional like bedrock of the middle of that game is Fidelio's sacrifice.
yeah,
That really hit me in a major way. I was heartbroken that happened. Like you see it coming, you definitely do, especially when you get to the opera house stuff. The entire twist of the opera house is actually
it's
really really good stuff.
fantastic twist. Yeah,
Yeah, it's really good. Some people have hand waved that whole situation with Zorba being around and stuff. I liked it personally. I'll kind of get into it when I after I talk about this, but Fidelio, I think his sacrifice is so important because you see them waffling against Luis throughout the game. Like initially, they feel like they're pretty dug in with him, but as they kind of tour the countryside with your group, you start to see them soften a little bit. Especially Fidelio, actually, even more than Basilio in some ways. You see him soften towards like having a different idea of things, or keeping up this facade of like, oh, the strong are the more powerful, we don't need to worry about the weak, sort of thing. Like that kind of falls away when he sees what you do with the people of Etria, for example. um but yeah, I really liked the crescendo of that particular moment. So
yeah.
yeah, I guess talk about the opera house stuff. What was your favorite part about that? Because I think that's probably my favorite part of the game, like throughout. I think the lead up to it, where you are investigating the Caradrius and then talking to Luis, and the culmination of that, I think that is the best stuff that Metaphor does.
Yeah, I definitely think the the swap that Luis does himself, for the two lances, the two dragon lances.
Yes.
He
Yes.
gives the pontiff or whatever, the fake one, and
Hmm.
so that's pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, the swapsy, like the whole genus of them going after this staff in general to assassinate. Basically, the staff can bypass the royal magic. Like
Yeah.
that alone is a really cool like MacGuffin to go again to go after, and that's kind of why they end up in Etria and Basilio and Fidelia get involved. But whenever he flips that on you and you think you succeed, I thought that was just brilliant. Like you see him dead.
Yeah.
He actually, like, Luis actually dies, like actually in the game, and everyone sees him die. And Zorba had been planted there to kind of save him and harvest his body, right?
Yep.
And you think of him as kind of like a nobody because like Zorba's at the beginning of the game, you kind of clean him up pretty quick, and you're just like, okay, you're just the
I
first one of
struggle
these.
against Zorba, but that's just me.
Well, no, like, well, I'm just saying, like, as a character,
Sure.
like the fight was tough. I'm not gonna lie, but like as a character, you're like, okay, I'm supposed to get through you. I'm not like worried about you.
Yeah.
You feel like a crony. It felt like a crony thing.
I definitely
But
thought
him,
he was gone. Like, I didn't
Yeah,
think
me
he'd
too.
come back. Yeah,
Right. I didn't even think of it being a necromancer because, like, how could he how could he resurrect himself after he's died? Like, you don't think about that.
yeah,
Um, but him reestablishing himself after he's kind of been throughout the game as that cloaked figure was pretty mind blowing. I think that reveal was really excellent.
yeah,
Um, and I even liked his fight in the Veil. I really liked that too. That was really cool.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I guess what are your thoughts on Zorba as a character in general?
Yeah, I think he's a pretty decent antagonist. He, you know, he, he's just kind of a fanatic.
Right.
It's, a good cautionary tale. Really, too much of good thing is bad. He had too much
Drinking too much
fanaticism.
Kool-Aid. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
like
Yeah.
as
In
like
some ways he's more fanatical than Luis is,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah, it's, he becomes he thinks of himself as a disciple, but he comes off as a fanatic.
yeah,
And even Luis, I think in some ways knows he is wrong, but he's trying to like will it to happen. You know, this entire like transmogrification of all the peoples in the land, right? And that twist is also great too. When
yeah,
you find out that it's the Attack on Titan effect where everybody has it, you know. Um, but I feel like it's not just played off. I think they really do well with it. Um, and I think Luis's true nature being also an Elda is huge. You know, the facade of the rogue horns is really cool, or the Clamar horns, I should say,
yeah.
is really cool. But yeah, I think Luis is the strongest character in the game. I'll put it there. What is your thoughts on Luis's character before I get into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's kind of just misguided. I think that
Totally.
you
That's the
know,
word for it right there. Yeah.
yeah, I think that if he had the same sort of like guidance that the protagonist has, I think he would end up to the sort of same conclusion the protagonist did, and instead he comes off into like a kind of a lonely conclusion, like gets in his own head and thinks he has to do
hmm
everything himself, and that his ideas of the world is the only fair idea of it. So
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, misguided. That is like the perfect label for Luis because in every way he is the strongest character in the game. He is the strongest mentally, physically, relationally. He is the most charismatic character you meet throughout the game. He feels like he's spinning the world on the tip of his finger. He feels like he always has the right word to say at every moment. And even when you think he's backsliding, he always has one or two moves ahead of you than you think he does. Like he's always better prepared than you are. And that the complexity of him, his character and the plot that revolves around him, I think is just really well done, really well executed. And I think that Luis always keeps you guessing. That's what makes him so interesting as a character. Like even playing the game, you're seeing a lot of it. You're living in the world in some ways. You think you can see what his plan is, but really you don't know for the longest time what he actually wants to do. You think he's just like vying for power, but really it's like a way bigger deal than it initially seems,
yeah,
right? Um, I guess what's your favorite part about the election scenario? I think the coolest part is initially before they kind of like throw off the shackles of the entire thing, figuratively and literally. I think the most interesting part of the election is having the royal magic bar other candidates from killing each other. I think that is the coolest part of the early game.
yeah,
And then seeing how that changes with Luis kind of getting involved with Hythlodeus in the sky, I think that's really cool too. But what are your thoughts?
yeah. And I liked the. This is a little bit of an anecdote, but
Yeah, please.
when I was going up to the top of the opera house during the opera house
Uh huh.
sequence, I actually ended up having Holy Knight's Proclamation equipped to main character, and
Okay.
so whenever I would use that, it would force the enemy soldier units to target main character, and they would get frozen with the chains because they were forced
Oh,
to Yeah, they were forced to target him, and so the
Wow.
royal magic would chain the enemies.
No way.
Yes, yes,
That's so cool. I had
yes,
no idea you could do
yes.
that.
Because they only
Oh my
target
goodness.
Yufa,
Right, right, right.
but if you
Yeah.
use Holy Knight's Proclamation or Knight's Proclamation, they have to
Well, don't
target
they?
main character. So
Yeah.
then they get frozen whenever they even try and target you.
That's unbelievable. I had no
So
idea that was
I
a
was just
mechanic.
able to climb that super easily because I just
Well, I love that because it's, you run the risk of when you play a video game going against what the story has, right? Which is ludonarrative dissonance. But
yes.
having that in the game compounds upon the plot line. I find that so interesting. That is something I didn't know. That's so cool.
Yeah, and I don't know if you noticed them only targeting Yufa when you were climbing
Right.
that. Um,
Yes.
I didn't have that happen because I'm like, oh, they're gonna target her. No, they're not. They're gonna target main
Mhm.
character.
Yeah.
And
Do they target her because she's a spellcaster or
No,
what?
they target her because they're afraid of the royal magic. They say it in their dialogue
Interesting.
when you're climbing that. They'll
Oh.
say, "We can't attack him. He's a candidate, so we're gonna attack."
Oh, they say it too. Wow.
Yeah, they say they're gonna attack Yufa. That's the only
That's
place in the game
crazy.
that I know of where the royal magic actually helps you out. But
Wow.
and it's not like a big deal. There's no big boss or anything to fight
That-
during that.
That's a
climb,
big deal to
but
me. I mean, yeah, I had no
just
idea. I mean,
narratively and mechanically, and bringing everything together.
yeah,
That felt good to be like, yeah, okay, so they want to target her. Well, no, they're not, and now
yeah.
the cause and effect is that they're getting locked by the royal magic. The enemies are.
That's unbelievable. I think that manifests chiefly because you're not fighting a lot of human characters in the
Yes.
game. So when you are in the opera house, well, not human, but like peoples of Uchronia,
Yeah.
you're not fighting a lot of that. You're fighting a lot of monsters, a lot of
Yeah.
people, a lot of things and creatures that don't vote or are in an election, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe even have a brain about them. You're fighting minotaurs, ogres, that sort of thing, whatever, goblins, kind of your regular fantasy fare. So when you say that, that makes a ton of sense just thematically. I kind of wish I kind of wish I saw that, man. That's so cool. When I play it again, because I definitely will, I'll be playing it again for the platinum stuff. I will go through that and see that for myself.
Yeah, make sure
That's
you have
fascinating.
Knight's Proclamation on your
Yep.
main
Yeah,
character,
for sure,
and you'll
for
be
sure.
able to see that interaction. But
Wow.
the
That's unbelievable.
that harkens back, to the towards the beginning when you're fighting that monk with the spear, and you can't
Mhm.
attack him because he's
Right, I do
protected
remember
by
that.
the royal magic.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that was a gauntlet runner fight, right?
Yes. Yes. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And so
And they're just like, yeah, at those early fights, they're like, oh, we can't do anything against them, and they can't do anything against us. Well, we better like cripple them or whatever and let them run off. And that obviously changes, past a certain point, right? With Luis kind of remarking like, "Yo, let's just duke it out.
yeah.
Let's just actually like drop these chains and fight for real because you tried once and it didn't work, and let's like actually do it because I face me like a man, you know." And like Hephlodius, who set up the election, was like, "Sure,
Yeah.
why not?" So
But then he doesn't really
Yeah.
face you like a man because he totally
not
had him
really,
in that second fight.
Yeah.
But
yeah, because I think at that point, just as a character, and this is definitely not what actually happens. Because this is just my projection of it. I think he's scared of you at that point.
yeah,
He feels like he died. He just straight up died.
yeah,
If he didn't have that failsafe, he would be toast, and there would be no more game, right?
Yeah.
And in some ways, it feels like in other games that could have been the end, right? It's interesting to see like, okay, we did all this build up, we spent all this time, all this game, building up to this point. Excuse me. How do we move on from here? And I feel like that being like the pinnacle of that. And then when more story happens, you're like, okay, this is still consistently interesting because we're getting into the genus of the world, what your role is, and the actual like true nature of what humans are, And this happens like directly after this,
yeah.
Um,
And I mean, I could see an alternate like world where they do just kill off Luis there, and they have the
100%.
effects be like the big
Uh-huh.
bad, and you like have to go up against
100%.
the church as a whole, you know, because that's another big problem in that game's world, right?
Huge.
Is that Sanctifex church, and they're definitely a
In
big
some ways,
push
yeah.
for the inequality in that game's world,
Mhm.
and so there could be, you know, an alternate world where that is like the big crux of the game, and the big bad is, you know, that
Mhm.
church organization.
It's Forden. It's Forden,
But-
yeah.
and
And in
Forden,
some
yeah.
ways, yeah, in some ways, it's a bigger problem because it is institutionalized radicalism. Like, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So, in some ways, like, even Luis doesn't like Forden, and that's telling to me.
Mhm.
And it's not just because he's a threat to his push for the throne and to take over. He straight up just fundamentally does not agree with their principles and strictures, right?
Yeah.
And you know, he believes it in his own twisted way, Luis does, where he's like the strong should stick around, right?
Yeah.
But it's also his form of equality, as compared as juxtaposed against yours, where it's true equality, where you know they're striving for utopia, but they're not quite reaching it. But everyone has equal footing to start, you know, grasping towards a better future, right? If Forden wants to kind of keep the status quo, keep these illicit igniters from, or keep these illicit igniters through the market, right?
Yeah.
And just kind of like perpetuating this cycle of inequality. That's what he wants. And if he were to wrest control of the country, as bad as it is, sanctism would take root throughout the world. Like in places like Etria, where they have their own religion, their own beliefs, and their own structure, they would also be tainted because they don't get invaded by the Sanctus Church, right? But they just leave them alone because they're impenetrable, right? But if Forden were to take over, he said himself, we would go after other peoples, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, what's your take on Forden and that entire situation? Because I feel like that's even a bigger issue than Luis in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, Luis's, you know, situation was world ending, right? That at least
Yeah, that's why
For
it is a
the-
bigger issue fundamentally. Yeah.
yeah, for the world of at least for like the country, the whole country would be turned into. I don't
Yes.
think it was the whole world of
Yeah.
metaphor. I think it was that whole country of
Sure.
I can't remember what that country's name is now. but-
It's Uchronia.
Yeah, Uchronia, yeah,
I think
yeah, yeah.
the
Yeah.
world. I don't know if they don't name the world. I don't think.
No, they don't. I don't
it
think they
anything.
name the world, but that country that you travel around in is Uchronia.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and Forden's like a societal issue, but like
Yes.
Luis is an actual like impending doom issue.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, he's got like the, you know, the stereotypical, you know, godlike powers, you know, but
Mhm.
I don't think he actually uses the archetype powers. I was thinking about it. He says he does, but
Mm.
I don't think I think it's an incomplete usage of that archetype power because
Okay.
he morphs his body to the archetype instead of the
Mhm.
archetype morphing sort of around him like it
Like
does for
a
everyone
stand or
else.
something. Yeah, like a setting apart. So well, that's interesting though because
He like fuses
way it's-
with the archetype.
sure, right, and the way it's demonstrated with your party, at least in cutscenes, you're like kind of morphing into that in
Yes.
a spiritual way,
Yes.
where you are not actually becoming an organic being, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like if in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Joseph Joestar morphed into Star Platinum or something.
Yes.
Like
Yeah,
it
it's
was like that.
Whereas with
Yeah.
Luis, he just kind of, you know, grows demon horns and some more
Yes.
appendages, and you know,
He becomes a human.
archetype.
Yeah, he
Well,
becomes human. And
Even before that, though, he claims to have
Yeah.
the archetype power, but he doesn't.
when he becomes like godlike, yeah.
yeah, when he grows the demon horns and he has like the wing,
Mm-hmm.
like the little blade wing things, and
Yes.
stuff like that.
I know exactly what you
And,
mean.
Yeah. In that first sort of phase of him, right? He says he has the archetype power, but I don't think he does, and so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I think it's because he has the base discipline to be able to do it, but I think he's applying it in the wrong way. I think it's what you
Yeah.
said. I think he understands it as a higher form of power, but he's actually transmogrifying himself into that instead of kind of being bestowed upon it, like your characters, and kind of emitting it, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
right? He's becoming the manifestation of the power, not projecting it. I think that's the best way to probably put it.
Yeah.
And at some point, like his hubris leads him into actually becoming a human by the end. Like that final form of him, the
Yep.
secret boss of Caradrius, is him as a human. It just is. Um, and that's the secret boss technically. And it's just that form is really frightening too,
Yeah.
because it's in some ways it is the truest form of Luis as a character. Um, but he's like beautiful and angelic in a way where he seems kind of like a fallen angel in some way, and I love the artistic depiction of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So
interesting because the form before that I don't think is human because you don't get the like the
I think you're
bonuses
right.
for using like human attacks on that. So I'm not sure what that form before that is. Maybe that is him actually using his archetype power. I would be able to believe that that was him actually tapping into that archetype power, that second form.
Sure, I
Fully
could definitely
embracing
see
it.
that too. Yeah, I think
Maybe
you're
like
right.
a judge sort of archetype power or
Right.
something, because that it
Yeah.
kind of seems like it's about like judgment and stuff like that, with the way
Hmm.
that the three heads kind of like are sacrificing things and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So, but yeah,
Yeah.
that third type is really interesting, like the power to wipe out a whole tribe. That's like crazy.
Right. That
You have to
last
swap
form.
out
Yeah.
your party members, otherwise they just instantly die.
Hmm.
He just calls out a tribe. Yeah, this tribe. Nope, they gotta go. Now,
That's a
interestingly,
tough fight.
I don't think I never got him to call out the Elda tribe. And I think
Hmm.
that is because that would probably kill him if he tried to call out the Elda
Oh,
tribe.
you're bringing up some crazy stuff because, like, I think you're right about that too. That is mind blowing to me too. I think that is really special. That's what makes this game special is the details like that, where it's not just story related; it's manifesting in gameplay like that. That is
Yeah,
actually extremely profound. What you just
I
said about
pay
the
very
Elder.
much attention to those little gameplay details. I'm not
Yeah.
very good at like paying attention to like the story beats and things like that, but gameplay details and that just bringing it all together in the gameplay with the world building, with the story, that's what I
Hmm.
really care about in a game. If
That's insane.
game's consistent with that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, and to kind of talk about the boss design and the art design, it feels very Renaissance based. There is some old artwork I have seen of literally a fish head with legs, and they kind of just completely cribbed from that. And like the egg boss with like the table and kind of the broken shell, that's part of like old Renaissance paintings and
Yes.
stuff, like this surrealist art.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. Um,
it's really cool to see the final boss still carrying that sort of lineage with it, even in its final form, right?
yeah. It definitely reminded me of like Hieronymus Bosch and things like that. So
Yes, Bosch is
yeah.
huge. Yeah, that's it right there.
Yeah, that I think that was a huge inspiration for that. It had to be, because like I was like, this is ripped straight out of Bosch. I'm pretty sure. So
Hmm.
that
Yeah,
like yeah, like
yeah.
the egg table thing, like yeah, that had to be like ripped straight out of Bosch.
Hmm. Hmm.
But
Yeah. So the difference between in some ways it is very like Persona, and in some ways it's not. Like I think the similarities are in its stylings, its kind of character archetypes as personalities, not as like jobs. You know what I mean?
mm,
Like you have the best friend character, you have the kind of mysterious woman or the beautiful woman, whatever. You have
mm,
like the really interesting mascot character in Heisme. Um, it's very like Persona in that way, and then it's like different in a lot of ways too. Like they have a version of like the Velvet Room in this called Academia,
yeah,
and I wanted to know what you thought about more as a character, his kind of like I don't know, his kind
I
of final arc, and like
yeah.
what that kind of ties to your character. What do you think about all that?
I saw the reveal that he was the king coming like a mile away. Like as soon as I saw him, I'm like, didn't I just see this guy in the opening cutscene? But sure,
Mm,
okay.
yeah,
So um,
yeah.
I kind of already had that figured out after like seeing him for the first time. But yeah, okay, sure, we'll go along with this, whatever.
Yeah,
But
there's some stuff you can kind of brush aside and go like, yeah, I guess that's not like the cleanest thing ever, but it's pretty good storytelling. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And as for like him actually acting out on like his convictions of like, hey, I actually want to save my son here, and
Hmm.
I want to keep him in the real world.
Yeah.
That was pretty
Yeah.
interesting. His fairy tale sort of world is the real world for us, and
Hmm.
so
Yeah, I
that
found that really interesting too.
yeah, it was an interesting story beat. I mean, gameplay
So, okay.
wise, I was already geared up for like fighting the secret final boss, so like
Yeah.
he's just kind of
Right.
a pushover. He's just kind of an
Hmm.
obstacle in the way at that point. But
Right. Yeah. That fight was it was very like, I hit you 3 times, you're done.
yep,
And it felt like he didn't even, I don't even think I had him fighting back because I was so
no,
overpowered.
yeah,
And maybe that's something he just doesn't do. He doesn't fight you. I don't know. It's barely a boss. It's more of a story encounter.
it's more of a story
Um,
encounter. Yeah.
yeah. And I think,
There is a bad
this,
ending you can get though. I accidentally got it when I was
I did
just
too.
like mashing through text. I was like, yeah, sure,
Uh
okay.
huh.
I'm like, oh,
There's actually a
okay.
couple bad endings too. There's
Yeah,
one if you like. Okay, I just basically did this to try it out. Like, so when it comes to like the end of the game, when you are going to do that final sprint against Luis, like they go like, there's some urgency going like, you need to go back to the star and you need to go finish this dungeon, right? And
yep,
Gallica's kind of barking about it here and there. You're like, okay, what happens if I don't do this? And obviously you fail the game, right? But I wanted to see how it goes, because then the story's over. And literally they go in like his text crawl and say, "Yeah, Luis prevailed. Everyone just kind of quit, and he took over, and no one knows what happened because it was really bad." Like, if it was really interesting that way, though, I'm like, I was kind of hoping for like an actual ending, but they just kind of wanted to have something to go like, yeah, you didn't do the right thing, go back.
yeah,
It's just funny to see this like fake future going on. Like, oh, it was so terrible. No one can comprehend how bad it was because everyone turned into humans, right? Um, and they don't ever really show you what a world full of humans would actually look like.
yeah,
So having that little nod to it's kind of fun. Um, but yeah, you talked about like more like him being not even an obstacle to
yeah,
you towards that secret boss. I in a story in a story setting, so like it's basically you're the prince. Okay, you're just the prince. It becomes very apparent very soon,
very
about
soon.
midway through
Yeah,
the game, what is happening.
yeah,
You're like, okay, I don't know how they're going to explain this, but obviously I am someone actually important because I
yeah,
don't have enough of this history filled in, right? um, and then you have this big dump at the Vale, and you become who you actually are. um, I'm just interested, like, what is your take on what your mother kind of plays in the story as like kind of the angelic being that is bestowing these archetypes, compared to Hythlodius wanting to like save you in his like velvet room world and kind of guiding you throughout the game, or even like setting this like different personality there that he doesn't remember he's king. Like, what do you think about all that? It's a lot to unpack, honestly.
yeah. It's interesting. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know if it's
I
like the cleanest storytelling they do,
yeah,
but
I think they kind of had to do it like that to tie it all in to make it make sense. It
yeah,
does tie into like the whole like Gallica and protagonist connection. I really did like that
I like
connection
that.
between those
Yeah.
two. I think Gallica is probably the best. You said Heisme is a mascot character, but really I think Gallica is more of the
Yeah. I mean, just
mascot.
in appearance for Heisman, like he seems like a teddy. You know what I mean? But not actually. Like in personality, it's different.
Yeah, I would almost say he's more of like the strong type, like the uh in Persona 3 the punching guy. His name is
Oh,
escaping
I
me.
forget his name. I know who you're
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
I want to say Akihiko, but that's probably not right.
It's not Aki. It's the guy with the beanie, right? Is that who you're talking about?
No, no.
Okay, so no, yeah, it was Akihiko. I thought you meant the guy with the jacket. No,
Oh
it's
no,
Akihiko.
no, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So he's kind of like the strongman type that they have because they have like
Right.
what's his face, the lightning guy in Persona 4.
Yeah.
Kenji? No, that's
Oh,
not it.
what is his name?
Kanji? No.
Kanji. It was
Is it
Kanji.
Kanji?
Yep, it is
Okay,
Kanji.
yeah.
It is Kanji. Yep.
Yeah. Yep, yep, yep.
Oh,
So
Kanji.
they
What a
always have
complicated
like
character.
that they always have like that strongman type. That's definitely the
Yeah.
role that Heisme plays, but he also plays like he almost plays like a also like a father figure for the protagonist.
Yes.
I mean, I was
Yes.
tearing up by like the end of those. Like, oh
Oh
my
my gosh.
gosh! Like
His bond is the
anytime,
best. Yeah.
yeah, and like whenever you're like visiting all your like supports at the end,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
before you go do the
Right.
last fight with Luis, like I just saved him for last because I'm like he's gonna have the best one. He's gonna have the best one, and yeah, I mean,
He
I
did.
was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, when he's like asking you to share his sake, you're like, oh my god,
Yeah,
I'm going to
it's
actually
like I
die.
want.
Yeah.
He's like I want to. I'd like to share this with you when you're grown up. And, oh man,
Yeah.
it's so good. That just like that whole like bond of like, oh man, oh I'm gonna start tearing up if I keep talking about
It's
it.
tough. It's so
Yeah.
tough, and it's tough for me as a parent, really, because
Yeah.
I can envision that happening. Because as a parent, you worry about the worst for your kid. You just do,
Yeah.
and the worst happens to Heisman's son,
Yeah.
and it's completely devastating. And you see him as a character completely racked with guilt for not being there for him. Um, you know, it, he is a character of grief and kind of deciding he is not just one version of Heisman. He's a lot of different versions, right? To a lot of different people. Like he's not just a knight, he's not just a father, he's not just a mentor. He's all of those, and he's also racked with grief. How do you square that and move forward? And that's what his bond is about primarily, because you're dealing with basically him and the protagonist burying his son. That's kind of his main goal throughout the game, is finding a final resting place for his son, who was horrifically trampled by a hostile crowd, right? Um, and it's just the storytelling they do is genuinely the most affecting relationship uh, stuff I've seen in one of these games. Him going back to the town and kind of being rebuffed after like what had happened with them and what they think of outsiders, and him never really belonging to that town in general because of what he decided to do. It was really affecting. I
Yeah.
don't know what you think about that, but
No, it was a beautiful story, but I was going through it and you know, it's kind of out of left field because like this game in particular doesn't really deal with like grief as a
yeah. Hmm.
subject a lot, whereas something like a Persona 3, like you play through
Yes.
that, pretty much half the supports are all about death or
Yeah.
grief or like
Yeah.
I was thinking of Bunichi and his wife's
Yeah.
supports the old couple running the
The
bookstore
old
and
couple, the dying man on the bench, the little
Mhm.
girl kind of grieving the loss of her parents' relationship. Like
yeah.
there's a lot of really tragic social links in Persona 3 specifically that I've actually like plugged along more and seen more of them. And the more I get invested, the more it's taking a toll on just me. Just like I feel that grief in
Yeah,
that more than in metaphor. Yeah.
yeah, that game is. I mean, you have to take it in small doses because like
Yeah,
it
that's
has
kind
a
of where I'm
great
at.
it has a great message. Not to get too off track, but that game has a great message. But it does tie it all, together into a tale of hope. And I think Metaphor is also taking beats from that and saying, yeah, we're gonna have
Yes.
this tragic story, but we're gonna tie it into a tale of hope. Heisme
Yes.
has his son's remains with him at close to his heart, and then he
Yeah.
has the protagonist and says you're like a son to me.
Uh-huh.
So
Oh man. That
um,
that one that line, yeah, it's getting
yeah.
me too. Like
Oh
that
yeah.
line right there.
Yeah.
That line right there about crushed me.
Yeah.
It is just, oh, that's tough. It is the most affecting piece of dialogue in the game, I think. I
Yeah.
really genuinely do. Because you get to see how he's dealing with this problem, right?
Mhm.
And you're just trying to be a shoulder to listen, lean on, and kind of be dependable.
Yeah.
And you know, when people deal with grief, it's tough because you never know what to say, you never know what to do. It's one of those things where like you kind of have to go with the motion of the ocean on it and try not to
Yeah.
overstep.
Yeah.
And Ismay is different than some people where he's dealt with this grief for so long. He feels like he kind of wants to lay it to rest. Like he's not over it, but he's ready to find a stopping place for it, right? So him being welcoming and accepting of you and you being worried about him is genuinely so affecting because of his tragedy.
Yeah.
Him missing that familial bond and kind of projecting that onto you, saying you are a son to me, is
Yeah.
so huge and so powerful, right? And I think that's what Metaphor does the best in this bond specifically. I feel like it is the best piece of storytelling this year, and I feel like it's the best piece of storytelling in any of their games. It is Heisman as a character, his story, the way you are introduced and play into that, it's something I just won't forget. It is something I will
Yeah.
base their other social links, bonds, whatever you want to call it, on. You know, by the end of it, and by the final blink of the glass, when you're wrapping up your bonds, I was really heartbroken to finish that one. I was just like, man, I would just if he could be a pal for me with me forever, I would 100% take him up on it.
Yeah.
He felt like a real character, like a real person
Yeah.
by the end
Yeah.
of it,
He
and it's hard to
was.
say that with a lot.
Yeah, he was a well thought out character. Yeah, he felt like an actual like character that could live in this world, right?
Yes,
It
yes,
it's interesting, yeah, because like he gets trapped in his grief, and
yes, he does. He does.
he
Like actually, though, he
Mhm.
actually gets trapped in a
Yeah,
place. Yeah,
just for years just spends that dwelling on that grief and hoping
hmm,
for death. Essentially, is
right,
because he's so
right.
stuck in that grief. And whereas someone like the there's two other bonds in the
Yes,
game that deal with grief. There's Alonzo and there's Basilio.
Alonzo.
Now,
Yeah, Alonzo was the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
you didn't like Alonzo's sort of bond. I felt like it was a bit sudden to change it to a tale of grief.
That's
That
what
was
I
like
was saying.
a
Yeah.
little bit of whiplash, but
Uh huh.
I think they set out to tell a story, and I think the way that they wrap things up is really nice.
Okay.
Um,
So you did like it. That's good.
I liked it. Yeah,
I liked 80% of it. I will put it that way.
yeah,
I feel like the last two bonds feel like a rug pull. Okay, and I'll kind of get into it a little bit. So the Alonso stuff is really interesting because he gives you a really good archetype. It's Faker, which is really good. It's good for debuffing.
yeah.
It's good for like kind of honestly rug pulling your enemies, which is really cool.
Mhm.
Um, but he never felt like a character that I like actually liked. Like I liked the story, but he always felt like he was always willing to backstab you, even though he never did. He felt like an untrustworthy character to me, and that's kind of the point, right? But when they decided to have his fake death, um, I don't know.
I thought he was
It felt
faking
like
it.
a little mean spirited because you had gotten so far into that bond. You're like, okay, I thought we were actually trying to like get to know each other, and you kind of hoodwinked me as a character, and you didn't clue me on what your ultimate plan
Hmm.
was to kind of save everybody, right? And he sees it in his own way as being like a roguish noble character, but the way it came off, it was like, oh, okay, so you're like you still just don't trust me, even though I'm working closest with you, right?
Yeah,
It felt like a betrayal of me as a character. It's hard to explain. And then they explain it away later where like the whole villain he's been kind of going after, this like local villain he's been going after, is in on it too, and you're like, okay, what is this? Is this just artifice? Is this just like actually just a rug pull? Does he really even care about what you think? Like that whole, it just felt odd. I don't know why. I don't know. I just didn't love it. It felt like it was almost there, and then they did something kind of radical. I don't know. What do you think about that?
yeah. I think they did what they had to do a good, you know, a con artist story
That's
in
really what it
that
was. Yeah.
world. And oh, did my camera freeze?
It seems like it's fine. It'll probably pick up. You're good.
Let me.
Yeah,
But
there's me.
yeah, my camera's not working. But anyways,
You're fine.
yeah, I think that I think that it worked out fine. But yeah, I can see where like these are your bonds are supposed to trust you through sort of thick and thin.
Yeah.
But they definitely are like that one is definitely like, yeah, I'm gonna go off and do this thing, and you might be able to join. Might not. I had to plug in my camera, but
Oh, you're fine.
yeah. So I can see where you're like, yeah, that's a little bit off putting. So yeah, for the
That's really what it was for me. Yeah.
yeah. So I would say that they missed the mark a bit. I think if you like talking to him before the final fight and talking to him in the post credits, talking to Alonzo, I think those two conversations kind of wrap things up nicely and make you realize that he will be more trusting of the main character moving forward. He even talks a little bit about the Nydia's secret to the protagonist if you talk to him
Right.
in that sort of post game. So
Yeah. Yeah. And that's all fine and dandy. Like it feels like recommitting to your main character in some way, but it not being shown on screen was off-putting because I was like, okay, so you're gonna do better now, but like how can I like actually trust you because you haven't given me anything material to kind of grasp onto. That's really it. Like I
yeah,
said, I think the bond is 80% there. I think the actual telling of the story before the end is really gripping and really exciting, and it also felt untrue to the character to ally with someone that killed his mom. That's really the thing. It felt like a betrayal of a character going, against his all of his like thoughts and feelings to do this certain way when he put a lot of value into his mom and really saw her as the only beacon of light into his life, right?
yeah.
um and when this villain kills her, like he's genuinely affected by this,
He
but when
wants to kill himself. Yeah, like you
he
have
wants
to
to
talk
kill
him out.
himself. He wants to kill himself, but he also wants to kill the villain too. Like he's very angry and vengeful about it. He's like, I'm gonna get back at him for this, and you know, it feeling very organic that way, and then it not turning out that way was really odd for me because then you see the clandestine approach he came to, and you're like, why did you do it this way? I don't know. It was puzzling to me. It was puzzling, especially given that his mom was such a central character to him and his story, right? I do think Alonzo is a good character. I felt like the ending could have been stuck a little better. Personally, that's just me.
Yeah, I think it's also a tale of forgiveness in a way.
It is,
Like
yeah,
he realizes that guy was just a tool for somebody higher up, and so he was just going in the system. His family was affected by this sort of system of there's somebody higher up, and so if you don't fall in line, then something happens to your family. His daughters and
yeah.
whatever were threatened, and so it's just showing
I
that it's a
just,
vicious
yeah,
cycle with that sort of thing.
it's a vicious cycle, and I was personally like, if I was in this situation, okay, it would be tough to be understanding. I would just be
Yeah,
honest with you.
I think if it had
That's why I
more
don't believe it.
screen time, right? I think it just needed more time to develop, right?
I think you're right.
I think that's the worst part about it being only 8
Yes.
ranks instead of 10 ranks like a Persona game is that
Hmm.
some of these just feel a tiny bit undercooked. Like they could have had a
A
little
little
bit more
bit.
time in the oven to develop these relationships. So,
Yes, and I feel like Hulkenberg is that way too a little
mhm.
bit. That her dynamic with this guy, and I guess we'll just talk about it. Her bond is good.
Yeah.
I think it is less good than like a Stroll or
Yeah,
Heisman. Stroll's is really
Strolls
strong.
is really strong.
Stroll's is very
Yeah,
strong.
it's really good.
In some ways, Stroll's is almost as strong as Heisman. Not quite, because I don't think he's as good of a character as Heisman.
Yeah.
But he's almost as strong because he's in your party the longest.
Hmm.
Like really. Um, I guess let's talk about Hulkenberg first a little bit, and then I'll kind of ask you about some of the bonds I haven't seen. Like I haven't seen Juna's full. I was like
Okay.
7 when I finished hers. I haven't seen all
You didn't
Basilio's.
miss
I
much.
didn't finish. I didn't finish
Oh,
Nuris's
Basilios
either. I
is
did fit.
really good.
Yeah, I do. I did need to see that one. I finished UFOs, and that was a really good like mystery.
Yes, yeah, I really
Um,
like Yufus. Yeah.
yeah. But let's kind of continue on with Hulkenberg and kind of work our way around because I do want to talk about most of these for sure. At least for our main party, like we can kind of sidetrack into the NPC stuff because there are interesting ones like Alonso,
Hmm.
but there's also like less interesting ones like Barden's okay. It's not amazing. It's more like a defending the town sort of thing. So I
Pardons
feel
is
like
okay. We can
he's
kind of maybe
fine.
skip over Pardons, to
It,
be
yeah, which
honest.
that's what I'm saying. Like we can kind of pick and choose. But as for your
Nurses
main
wasn't
party
that
characters,
interesting either.
yeah, no, okay. So Nurse is not. Probably don't have to get into that. It's
Yeah.
more like of a collectible, um,
He has
kind
good
of bond.
character growth, but it's kind of predictable character growth, so
It's predictable, and he also feels like your cab driver. Like
yeah.
he doesn't always feel like a real character in comparison to how fleshed out your party is, for instance,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
Like he feels like he's always going to go like, "Oh, we're going on this adventure. I better go fix some shit." Like that's what it
Yeah.
feels like, you know. I got to go. Let me go fix the leg on this gauntlet runner. We ran through some muddy waters, you know. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of what it feels like, and that's fine. But it doesn't lend a lot of interesting conversations to be had, you know.
Yeah.
With Hulkenberg, I guess it felt very like the whole thing is kind of like a standoff with an old partner, you know,
Hmm.
and he's kind of like ingratiated himself to is it the military or the
Knights.
church? I forget.
The
The knights.
yeah, the
Okay,
knights, yep.
basically the knight order that she used to be a part of.
Yep.
He's become kind of a high ranking official there, and he's like become pretty brutal and off putting. You know, I I just felt like that was one of the weaker ones because it's just like, oh, old friend I know, he bad, I must fight him, and that's kind of what happens, right?
Yeah.
What's your thoughts? What's your thought on Hulkenberg as a whole?
Yeah, I'd agree. Like it doesn't flesh out her character as much as like the main story does. To be honest, like I think
Yes, 100%.
without that,
Yeah.
she still would have came to the same conclusions, and
Hmm.
so because the
She
main
is,
character
yeah,
is the like prince, she like
yeah,
that fulfills her arc right there, right? Of having the prince
yes,
protecting the
yes,
prince. So like having the
yeah.
main character and doing all this stuff with Rodanth is like
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, I mean, like, and then they
I'm
have
with
like
you there.
the
Yeah.
shadow guard comes in all of a sudden, it's like, yeah, you got that guy for us, thanks. Like,
Hmm.
I don't
Yeah, at the
know.
very end.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
they're
don't
like,
know.
oh, we were looking for this. This guy was a miscreant. We should have never,
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's what makes her bond weaker is because she is so involved in the story. She
yeah,
is literally part of the main crux of the curse, taking place. Like she was there when it happened, and she was extremely involved in that. Right?
the story is a much better place for her to develop than her
Yes,
bond. Whereas with someone like
100%.
Stroll or Heismay, they actually develop in their bonds. So they develop
Yes,
as
yes.
characters in their bonds. They become better characters.
And it's kind of the inverse of the regular bond where Heismay, he's joining your party, but like he has this like whole side gig he's got going on, like he needs to bury his kid.
Yeah,
Stroll has been basically displaced, um, by you find out Luis,
yeah,
and him attacking his village and him becoming the first example of kind of like a human attack in this modern world. um, and it manifests and pops up multiple times through the story because you see him first as your first best friend character, and you play with him the most throughout the game, more than Hulkenberg, Heismay, whatever. He's the one that's there from the beginning, but like he's a really good balance, I would say, of having story critical moments crop up for his character and having that, like you said, fleshed out bond that you can really dig your teeth into.
yeah.
I feel like he's the best balance of the two. Yufa might be second because her Etria arc is really good as well. Um,
I
and
yeah, I really
yeah,
like Yufa.
Yeah, Yufa's great, and we'll definitely get into her because in some ways she
She
is the most
competes
like
with Heismei for me as like best like support.
Yufa
So
is really interesting.
yeah,
Interesting. Okay. She in some ways, yeah, she's a very complex character like Heismei.
yes,
Um, but before we get into it, because I think we'll really kind of dive into it, I'm very fascinated with Yufa as a character with her people.
yeah.
It's kind of like the whole area section we'll kind of
Mm.
talk about. But since Stroll is a first party member, what did you think of his arc start to finish? I really liked the entire thing. I
Yeah,
think it is done extremely well. So you go first.
yeah. I'd say that just yeah, from the beginning, he is just wears his heart on his sleeve. He's the I'm going to do this for justice, for doing what's right. That's how he's chosen to live his life. That's his
Yes.
reason for living. He doesn't have a reason for living outside of that sort of pursuit of justice.
Yeah.
And he shares that kind of with Hulkenberg in a way, but I think
Hmm.
where they differ is that he has more of a responsibility to his people, whereas
Yes.
Hulkenberg is responsible to just a single individual, and
Or
so
yeah,
the
you and she doesn't know
protagonist,
it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
um,
Uh-huh.
and so I think I that's why I like Stroll better because he's a more understandable character. He's a character I can better understand and relate with because
Hmm.
I kind of think in that way too. Sometimes I think of like, yeah, this is morally objectively right, and so
Hmm.
this is the way it has to be, and things aren't like that always, but sometimes in
Yeah.
my head I can think, yeah, this is why can't people see this is the moral objective right thing, and that's kind of how I think Stroll is as well. Like, hey, these people are displaced. We got to get these people,
Yeah.
homes, and it's like you've got the resource to do it. Why don't you just do it? And
Hmm.
the nobles are like, oh no, we don't want to use our resources for that. Those are
Yeah.
our resources.
Yeah.
So
In some ways, I feel like Stroll is the most morally unshakable character of the entire cast.
yeah,
In some ways, every part of the cast changes, right? I feel like Stroll never really changes. It feels like he gets more impassioned and emboldened about the
yeah, he
thing that
gets more
he is
confident. Yeah,
more confident, yes, about the thing he has kind of been charged with, right? The
mm-hmm.
difference, like Hulkenberg feels like she's failed, and she gets rejuvenated when she finds out that she's been leading the prince back to paradise the whole time. Heismay, he's been racked with guilt. He's kind of been part of the shadow guard and never really truly been recognized. Yet he comes back and kind of gets rejuvenated by your presence and his story, and finally laying it to rest. Juna, in some ways, is duplicitous, where she's working for Luis, but she's really working for like the Vale area.
Yeah,
Um, Basilio, kind of like is with Fidelio, where they're kind of just searching for the strongest guy, but they really deep in their hearts don't truly believe it, right? And then Yufa has a crisis of conscience when it comes to her religion. Like the statute of everything that she believes in being
it's insane.
completely cut away with the like truth of her island and its people, right?
Yeah,
Stroll in that way digs his heels in. He's like, no, 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 this is right, right?
mm-hmm.
I am not going to change. I am unshakable. That's what it feels like, and that's why, in some ways, as the best friend character, he's the easiest to like because
Yes,
he's kind of designed to make you like him, right?
yeah.
But
I was going to
he's
talk about
confident. He
that too.
becomes more confident as the game comes on, right?
Yeah,
What do you think?
yeah. You talked about he's designed to make you like him, and I agree. Like I think that you can't dislike Stroll. Like it would be
Hmm.
really hard to find somebody who's like, I hate that character. Like
Yeah. No.
he's just such a likable character. I don't think
Yeah.
he's going to be a lot of people's favorites. He's certainly
I
not
don't think
my
so either.
favorite
He's
because
not
he
mine.
has
No.
this sort of, um, it's I don't want to call it an entitlement, but it's almost like an entitlement to
Yeah.
justice he has,
I would
like
say it's an indignation and proclivity towards doing the right thing. I think he's digging his heels and knowing like, no, this is the right thing to do. I'm going to do everything in my power, even though, you know, I don't think I'm confident to do it quite yet. I know this is the right thing to do. I need
yeah.
to press forward in this, right?
But
Um,
also he has like the privilege of his nobility status, and
yes,
the
yeah,
privilege of his his race, you know, his tribe to.
Yeah, the Clamar being like the foremost race in the land.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I mean, the king is a Clamar too.
Yep.
Hethlodius, and a lot of high-ranking officials are as well.
Oh man, we haven't even talked about like the tribe disparity a whole lot and like where.
Yeah, so let's get into that. I want to get into that with Yufa because I think she's the most interesting race in the game. So we'll cut from there with Stro, who's a very solid character.
Very great character. Yeah.
Very good character. The bond is excellent.
Yeah.
Yufa, I finished, right? The ones I did not finish was Basilio, Neris, and I think Juna. But I did finish Yufa's, and I really liked hers. Talk about what you think about Yufa the entire way.
I want to talk about Juna real quick before we talk about Yufa.
Okay, we can do that first.
And because
please.
I think that if Juna wasn't in the game at all, I don't think the game would be very different for it. I think she's the most...
I think you're right.
Character you can take out of the game, and
she's very perfunctory.
There wouldn't be anything missing. Her whole story, if you followed just anecdotes of why she's there, she's basically there just because she was bored, right? She was bored and
she's basically medieval Taylor Swift. Like everyone sees her as this pop star, right?
Yeah, but she was sent to save the prince because she met I guess a fan or something that was trying to save the prince. She's like, oh, I want to do that too. Me. I want to be a secret agent. And I mean, gosh, yeah. And
to her credit, I think she does well, and she's very duplicitous. And Louis, I think with her being so close to Luis, he doesn't see that coming. I think that is important. But I do agree, she feels like one of the more perfunctory characters in the game.
See, I kind of disagree. I think that Luis knew that she was
you think so?
On his side the whole time, and he just didn't care. Just like with the protagonist, he knew they weren't on his side the whole time. He just didn't care because he was too powerful to be stopped, too big to fail. But so I think that with Juna, I mean, I can talk about her support a little bit, her bond.
I didn't see the end of it.
The Nydia secret is kind of interesting. I thought I would have liked to see more of that, develop, and maybe in the post credits have them all be in their true forms would have been cool. To try and be like, hey, this is what we actually look like. We want to be true to ourselves, and so we want to start doing this. That would have been cool to see. But
the idea of a glamour being imposed upon them, to kind of be normalized in society and ingratiated is really interesting. I think the way it's shown is very funny with her kind of being drowned in a belt in her street clothes. You're like, oh, that's a baby right there. What's going on? And that's why I didn't know how it was going to manifest, but I'm like, okay, I didn't get spoiled on it or anything, but I'm like, okay. She says she's alluded to this, and so does Alonso. He's like, oh yeah, we kind of have a different form we don't let people see. I'm like, okay, so what is this? This is a glassy-eyed look. Does that have anything to do with it? And it turns out it kind of does, right? But yeah, I think I agree with you. She does feel like the most perfunctory of the characters. In some ways, though, she has one of the most important ties to, I don't know if you call her a villain, but was it Rella? The was it Ishkia character? Yeah, she ends up putting a hex on you, the prince, right? And that ends up being a very important plot point because Hulkenberg's involved in that. You're involved in that. Juna is especially involved because she got adopted by Rella's parents, basically, and became a high-standing member of society because of their family standing.
Yeah.
And the part that's interesting about that, I think that is the most interesting part of Juna's arc in the story, because it involves you directly and the prince directly. The interesting thing about the Rella fights is that was cut content, from what I could hear.
Oh.
That was supposed to be a dungeon, as far as I understand, and it makes sense because it's the only time you go to the
Mage
college
Academy,
area,
yeah.
The Mage Academy. Yeah,
that would have been cool if that was a full dungeon of the Mage Academy.
And in a royal version, could they bring that back? I wonder.
Yeah, maybe they let you save Rella and have Rella on your team as well. Who knows?
Could be.
Yeah.
So with the advent of these royal versions, do they change the story that much, or does it just add on?
Yeah, Persona 5 Royal, they like it's a different ending and story and characters
Interesting.
entirely. Like, I'm pretty sure you can just get Akechi in your party for the whole game in that one.
Really?
Yes,
Interesting.
yes, he can just
Huh.
if you do things right with him and with his social link, I'm pretty sure you can just have him on your party for the whole game if you do it right.
Okay. So that's a massive change from base
Yes,
5.
massive change. Yes,
Massive, because Akechi is like the villain character for the
he's
most part.
Yeah, he's like the antagonist.
For the antagonist of the game, kind of writ large, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, that would be like akin to having Luis in your party, I would say.
Yeah, and that's
yeah.
why, like, I mean, there were even times that I was thinking, like, that'd be weird if they made Luis a party member, but, like, maybe they try and do that?
They're so diametrically opposed in just belief. I don't think they would do
Yeah.
that. It would be a Rella character, I think.
Yeah,
They
I
could
think
do
so,
that
too.
with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe that's one of those things where they like put out this new edition. They go like, we wanted to update this. We wanted to flesh this out. It could have been.
Here's
We
your
could change it.
Mage Academy dungeon. Here's your way to save Rella, you know.
Yeah, yeah, like having a path for that, like being able to do the original and then having a path to kind of branch off from that. That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, that was cut content. That fight with the dragon actually pretty tough.
Yeah, I didn't have any way to like remove the elemental shield, so I just smack into the elemental shield, waste 2 turns, and then just fight with 2 turns like the whole fight.
Yeah,
that's what I did.
Basilio was crucial for this fight for me. I will say he was.
I
very
didn't
powerful.
even have him in the party for that fight.
Really? Yeah, he was very good. Basilio is by far the strongest. Like, besides your character, he's like the strongest like melee character in the game. But his like melee uses a lot of MP attacks.
Yeah, I used
so it's
him
kind of
later
tough,
on, but I didn't use him for that.
especially with
fight,
the synergy stuff. He's very, very pricey when it comes to MP use, right? But he's very powerful, so he's like a good like cannon to kind of blast upon a foe, right?
Sure.
And I used him pretty much all the way. I think my party comp was me, Stroll. I kind of nixed Heisman. I got Hulkenberg. I think, and then it was Guna and then Basilio. I want to say that was it for my party comp for that fight. It took me a couple tries. It was pretty tough, honestly. I rewound a couple times. But yeah, I think in wrapping up Juna, she is fairly interesting. I think the most interesting things about her are the things that surround her. Her lineage being a Nydia, and then her family line being adopted, and her basically being sisters with Rella. A more interesting character, I would think. I would say. And the Ishkia are really cool too. You only see one in your party with Nuris, right? So it's interesting to see another version because you don't see a lot of Ishkia throughout the game, really.
Yeah, the only other Ishkia you really interact with regularly is the Maria, and she's half Ishkia.
Maria
half
too,
rogue,
right?
yeah.
She's half. She's got like little wings. Yeah, totally. She's like half Ishkia, half rogue, right? I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Because I guess we should talk about what's his name? What's it? The first like
Grius?
Not Grius. We should talk about Grius a little bit.
Yeah.
He's
he's your
you see it from the top. Yeah, basically. he's like introduced as a party member and then summarily executed.
Yeah. I'm like, oh man, I really am playing Fire Emblem. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. He's kind of like a non-party member. It's really interesting. He's like story. He's the only time they do a story-based party member, and you see it so telegraphed. It's insane. Like you see him. He looks kind of like basic. I mean, his voice acting, I say, was great. But
I didn't see it coming, to be honest. I didn't.
Did you not? Okay.
No, I didn't.
I definitely saw it.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
Yeah, because in the lead up to it, they're like, "Oh, we got to go kill Luis." I'm like, "Well, obviously, we're not gonna be able to. It's the beginning of the game. We're 10 hours in." He's like, "Oh, we got to go." Yeah, there's like, "We got to go kill Luis. I'm gonna do the assassination attempt myself. When I come back, we're gonna do everything you want, Maria." And I'm like, "Okay, he's dying." So I definitely saw that one coming. I was like, poor Grius. He didn't even have a bond either, and I was like, okay, well, this guy's cooked, right?
Yeah,
he could have been a cool character.
Cue.
And maybe in Royal too, maybe they flesh him out more. That would be cool. Like the next edition, I think that'd be
Yeah.
interesting. I
Yeah.
think the voice acting for him specifically is really good.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, he's like a party member. I could see them fleshing out if they did another edition of it. Um, so yeah, so up to now we've talked about Hulkenberg, Heismay, Stroll, Juna. I guess which one do you want to tackle next? Do you want to tackle a Yufa or would you tackle a Basilio first? Because I haven't seen the end of Basilio's line either, so I'm kind
Yeah.
of interested to see how that wrapped up.
I can talk a little bit about Basilio because
Yeah,
I
please.
want to really dive into Yufa whenever we
Yeah,
get to.
I think we should talk about Yufa last purely because of the race discussion and how it kind of intersects and interlaces throughout the game. So
Yeah.
go ahead with Basilio.
And I mean, Basilio has a little bit of that discussion built in, right? Being one of
Yeah.
the minor tribes, as well as Heismay as well is also part
Mhm.
of that discussion. We didn't
Yeah,
really
they're
talk
like the
about
lowest
that.
echelon. Yeah.
Yeah, of like the tribes, the races, they're the lowest, echelon in because
Carapace,
and
yeah.
it sounds like from what the game lets on, right? It sounds like a lot of that is because of the church, like the Sanctus Church.
Uh-huh.
That's what
Yeah.
it sounds like. Kind of like starts a lot of like that racial feuding is that sort of church.
Okay, so they're
doctrine,
inciting it, is what you're
so-
saying? Yeah, yeah, like they're inciting it.
Yeah, like it's in their scriptures that like Elda bad and Parapus bad and Nydia bad and stuff like that seems to be in their scriptures. So
Interesting.
yeah,
So it's like kind of a religious crusade against various peoples that
yeah,
they don't
it's-
like. Interesting.
Yeah, if you like dig into that stuff, like if you pay attention to what the church is like actually preaching that they're saying that's in their scriptures, it's really terrifying actually. But
That's like actually pretty. That's just fascism straight up.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, it's a fascist church system. It's insane. Like it's very dystopian. But
It's like evangelical fascism. Like that's the best way I could put
yeah,
it. You know.
it's terrifying. But
Yeah.
so yeah, he deals a bit with like you see throughout the game they talk about like the igniter experiments and like,
Yeah. The testing. Yeah.
the testing for the igniters and how they just throw Parapus at him, but then you
Mm-hmm.
realize that Fidelio and Basilio were both actually part of those experiments, and so you get like a first person perspective of like that sort of injustice and essentially human experimentation, right?
Yeah.
So it's like yeah, it's like horrifying content, like and you basically have to put down this old friend of Basilio's because he's gone mad after the igniter experiments.
That's where I saw it going, but I hadn't finished that, so I was kind of curious how that
That's-
wrapped up.
That's basically what happens. You put him down,
Oh,
and Basilio's
tough.
like, "Wow, that sucks. This society really sucks. We got to do something about this." Like, that's like where it ends off, and you like have like a one of them Parapus funerals for both. I want to say his name was Vikna or Venom.
I think you're right. It's something. I think it's like something
Yeah.
big now. Yeah, I think you're right.
But then you also do like a proper Parapus funeral for Fidelio at that same time. 'Cause he never got
man.
a proper like
I missed
Parapus
that.
funeral. They don't show anything. Like they just do it in the background.
Still,
sadly,
like the
but-
fact that they do that. So, like, see it from my perspective, where I'm like playing the game and Fidelia makes that noble sacrifice, and I'm like, okay, they just leave him there, you know? I never saw the end of that tree, right? So I never saw the funeral.
They do bury him after his passing in they bury him in that city, in that Altabury
Right.
city.
Right, but they didn't have like the big funeral like you're saying. Like I didn't see the actual thing with like
Yeah.
how Basilio's reckoning with it. I think that's really
Yeah,
interesting.
at the end of that bond, he goes
Yeah.
back and they have like a joyous funeral for
Okay.
Fidelio, because that's what the Parapus do. They have these joyous sort of funerals to celebration of life sort of thing, basically.
Gotcha.
So
Oh yeah, I wish I really would have seen that. If I wanted to finish any of them, it would have been Basilio's. It was one of those
it
things where like I feel like I didn't do it right, so I lost some time to finish
yeah,
that.
it was definitely worthwhile seeing that compared
Yeah.
to a Juna where it's just this singer and she gets poisoned, loses her voice, and then
Mhm.
Juna overcomes her fear of flowers and is able
Yeah.
to save the
Well,
day.
it was okay. So it was kind of I will kind of you know kind of confront you on that a little bit. It was not she was afraid of flowers. It was the memory associated with it
Yeah.
was tough. So like I'll kind of content with that. Um, I think that that part of the story was affecting most of it. The rest of it probably really wasn't. I agree with you there. Um, I think it's interesting because it's playing on her being a singer and a pop star basically in that world. Where I literally see her as medieval Taylor Swift. Like everyone knows who she is. Even Basilio and Fidelio are starstruck by Juna.
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, Lady Juna, we love you," you know.
Yeah.
Um, and they kind of feel that way with Arella too. Like that family has like a chokehold on
Mm-hmm.
them because of what they mean to them, you know. So they kind of like speak about Juna and her sister in these hushed tones, which I really enjoyed. Um, even like Fidelio's relatively unflappable. Like
Yeah.
whenever they come around, he's like, "Oh my God, like don't look at me," you know. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of fun talking about that. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad you kind of told me about that. That makes me want to really finish it. I like Basilio. His personality and his voice acting might be like my second favorite only to Heisme.
Mm-hmm.
I think the voice performance for Heisme is just the best in the game. Um, Basilio is an easy second. I love the way specifically in fighting he goes Berserker. I love that so much. It's my favorite. Every time he does it, I'm like, yes, more of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish he was kind of in your party earlier. I understand why they didn't. They did it for story reasons, but him being the last the last party member, I was stoked about that. I was like, oh man, it's such a bummer that I know that this game is like halfway done. I don't get more time with Basilio. You know,
Mm-hmm.
such a cool character. I love Basilio so much. Um, let's really get into UFO.
Yeah.
Okay, I want you to kind of lead the charge on this because I think you got more out of it than I did. But I feel like for me, the most impactful stuff is the island stuff. So you go ahead on it. First of all, I will say there being no relationships in the game, I feel like there was two romances they probably could have done, and it was Hulkenberg and it was Yufa. Yufa was this like flirtatious sort of character that felt like she was like naive enough to not understand, but cute enough to kind of like joke around with you, which I really enjoyed. What do you think about all that, and kind of get into Yufa as a whole?
Yeah, I think that with Hulkenberg, I think there was just too much of an age gap there. Like
I think you're right.
I
Yeah.
think that would be like the teachers and the
Yeah.
random ladies that you can date in Persona 5 to where it just comes off as a bit awkward.
And for that, I'm happy. I'm glad they didn't do it for the
Yes.
record. I'm just saying,
Yes.
like, she feels like in a Persona,
If this
she
was
would
Persona,
be interesting.
then yes, she would be. I agree. She would
Mhm.
be dateable if this was a
A
Persona.
100%. She's
But
made to like be
thankfully,
attractive. Yeah.
emphasis on the thankfully. This is not a
Yeah.
Persona, and you don't have to
Mhm.
deal with it being a pseudo dating sim. You know.
Yeah, and it's also different because of the culture. Like the age of consent is way different in Japan, even though it was raised. The age of consent was like 13 or 14, and I think they raised it to 16. So that kind of like cultural gap is different for us too, where they're like dating teachers and stuff in Persona 3, 4, and 5, and you're like, what are you doing?
I don't
Um,
think, for the record, I don't think even in their culture you're supposed to date teachers. I'm pretty sure that's still a no go even in their
is
culture.
so the teacher thing is taboo? Interesting.
It's
Okay.
still
Gotcha.
taboo in that Asian culture. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
So,
Okay. I am not privy to that, so yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But
but
yeah, continue.
and I think it's just like for like fantasy fulfillment, and that's kind of one of the areas that Persona 5 really falls flat for me, is that sort of like
Mhm.
fantasy fulfillment. Like, just make it different game.
My teacher Midnight says a freaking sexy maid. Like, come on, what are we
Yeah,
doing?
what are we doing? But anyways, I think that to this game's credit, to Metaphor's credit, they're able to make a very adult sort of party, like
Yes.
like all age groups in the party, and they're
Yeah.
also able to make like a very mature story with
Yes.
essentially zero romance. Like you were saying, there's a little bit of chemistry between the main
A little
character and Yufa. I think that is the most like canonical. If there was anything, it'd be main
Yes.
character and Yufa. That's what the game.
And it's the
hints
most
at.
age appropriate, I would
It's
say.
the most
yeah.
age appropriate, yeah. And so I think that
For sure.
and I if that sort of thing was shoehorned in there in a royal version, fine, go for it.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah.
You get your sales atlas, do whatever, but it definitely does not need to be in there. I think the hints and the flirtatiousness are good enough. The final conversation with Yufa, she teleports back to her island and her brother's like, yeah, I'm thinking of, giving, Yufa to someone to, take care of.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you better be really serious about Yufa, that. So they have the talk, sort of thing. Like,
Okay. Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
the game implies that both Yufa and her brother want this to be a serious thing between Yufa and the protagonist. So, but
yeah,
anyways,
in like a not doing the dating sim aspect, right? I feel like if they were to continue a story or talk about this or adapt this in any way, that could be a canon romance that they pursue for sure. But like you said, and this is what we talked about even on our initial discussions on the podcast, is it's a mature game with adult themes, and I like that.
Yeah.
Everyone feels like a grown up, and it's nice to kind of not deal with the frivolity of a romance.
But it's not adult themes as in like sexy time or
no, that's not what
even...
I mean. I mean like actual adult situations.
Yeah, exactly. It's like real adult situations. It's not bound by the constraints of we want to talk about adult lusts or we want to talk about adolescent lusts or whatever which is fine to do in a persona. It's fine. Whatever. Go for it, Atlas. If you think if you want to talk about that, fine. But I think this game is better for not having those elements. I think
it's
without those sort of elements. I think
it's better. And I think it makes this game feel more about something than even a Persona does. Like Persona feels like a life sim with like a really compelling story attached to it. This feels like the story is the main concern, and all the side stuff is more understanding of the characters that inhabit the world, right? Especially the ones that are tied closest to you. And before we really get into Yufa, because she's the main kind of point, I don't want to get too sidetracked. But talking about Hulkenberg as a romantic interest, it's interesting because like she kind of comes off as the stoic, kind of like knight, really. But the way she's portrayed throughout the game is kind of the comic relief, and I find that really interesting. Like, you think the mascot character in Heisme, which I understand what you're saying, he looks like a mascot character is what I'm saying, but like he is the actual strong one, right? Stroll is basically what you see, what you get. Juna is kind of perfunctory, but Hulkenberg, I should say, comes off one way as this stoic kind of like knight, but she's really the goofball, and she likes eating a bunch of weird food. She likes like commenting and making fun jabs about things. She is really like kind of the release valve for some of the tension in some ways, and that's not what I thought she would be. I thought she was going to be like, oh, this kind of like really really powerful badass who's extremely skilled, and she is that, but she's also like there's deeper personality in there that's has more levity than you think it would. I guess, what do you think about that?
I was getting kind of shades of Frederick from Fire Emblem Awakening right off the bat.
Okay.
And so,
I'm not familiar, but I got you.
I was kind of familiar with the character personality that they were going for with Hulkenberg, of that serious but also like comic relief.
Yeah.
Um, Seth in Three Houses kind of also fits that sort of bill, I think, of like
Yeah.
super serious, but also like has the comedy side to them. So,
Yeah.
um,
She has like a an earnestness to her humor that is very affecting. I
yeah,
think it's very fun.
yep.
Um, yeah,
So I was
totally.
familiar with the archetype, but I mean, yeah, it's not bad. I'm just not a big fan of Hulkenberg personally, but
Yeah, sure, sure. That's just a taste thing, I
yeah,
think. I mean, every we all think these characters are good in their
yeah,
different
yeah,
ways.
they're
Like
great in their different ways.
I don't think there's a weak character. I would think there are characters that are better than others.
Yeah,
I think if we were to go specifically for weakest party member, um, personality wise, it's probably Juna because of the story being kind of like a side quest for her in some
yeah.
ways. Um,
I
but
think that's
like,
the
I don't
main
think.
off-putting thing to me is that the story is kind of a side quest for her, right?
Sure, sure. She becomes something she's not, right?
Yeah,
And that makes it's not what she's normally doing, right? But everyone else feels like they fall into it because they
this is
are
the
are
only
magnetized
place
to
for
this.
them. Yeah,
Yes, because they are all outcasts and vagrants,
yeah,
She feels like she's like, I'm a vagrant too. She's a pick me girl, it feels like that.
yeah.
But like if you were to put her in a different game, like I feel like she would be stronger than a lot of other characters. Um,
Sure.
you know,
Okay.
that's just personally how I feel. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to speak for you, but Yufa, I think we should really dig down and talk about her because, like you said, she's one of your favorite party members.
Yes.
She's up there for me. I prefer Heisman Basilio over Yufa, but she's probably 3 or 4 for me. She's not middle of the pack. She's like kind of up at the top in that top tier. Um, get into what you think about Yufa first, and then we'll kind of talk about the race, the characteristic of the third eye specifically, and how it kind of is important to the island itself, and kind of like the class struggle of the entire land. So you take it from there.
Yeah, I think sort of the ways that they introduce Yufa as like she is not really a damsel in distress. She knows what she's doing in this temple. She's like, yeah, I'm going
Yes.
to fulfill my purpose. This is my purpose. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice myself to this dragon
Yep.
god, and
Mm-hmm.
that is what I'm here for. I figured that somebody would come to get me to the depths of this place. That it was only a matter of time. And so she's like, she's
Yep.
ready. She's ready to go. And so she just doesn't have the muscle to get there, but she's certainly not like a you gotta rescue her, damsel in distress sort
Mm-hmm.
of thing. There's not really that sort of thing in this game, which I like about
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just like the whole having her be in her shell with her sort of helmet throughout
Mm-hmm.
that whole dungeon experience, and then right at the end of the dungeon when you get to the dragon altar and she sees that her essentially her god has been corrupted by this human.
Mm-hmm.
She the mask sort of breaks, persona style, and she's everything's just sort of laid bare before her, and like she has this crisis of religion, crisis of her beliefs and everything she knew, but she's able to pull through and see that the people around her are wanting her to go through and fix the situation, and that her sacrifice would be pointless when she can
Mm-hmm.
do much better things without sacrifice. So
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like the Mayan princess or Incan princess being, sacrificed to a volcano to appease the gods.
yeah.
It's that sort of storyline there. Um, I really like I really like her design a lot.
Hmm.
Um, I will say I prefer her more with the helmet than without because on the island everyone's wearing helmets, you know. to kind of like I forget why exactly they do it. They said that they're setting themselves apart from regular folks. Do you remember what the reason that her brother gives is?
No, I
I
don't
forget what he
remember
says.
because I always was thinking that it was because before I got to the island, I thought that they did it, because they didn't want to show their third eye because it was off-putting to like the other tribes.
Yeah,
But then when you get to the island, you see everyone still has the
they
helmets, and
do.
so
Yeah.
you're
Uh-huh.
like interesting. I think it is like sort of religious practice for them, but I
Yeah.
think that the like the priestess and the chieftain are like exempt somewhat from that, except
Hmm.
for in
Hmm.
like public settings or something. I don't really know
Sure.
how they
Yeah.
justify it,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah. Everyone is
it's
doing it on the island. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, it's
That's something that
interesting.
they continue to do even as you get to know them. It's not something that they like put up as a shield and then they drop later.
Yeah,
Like Yufa's
and
in her case, her helmet actually breaks, right? So that's different.
she does
But
get it back later because like you can see her sort of messing about with it on the
mhm.
gauntlet runner, but she never like wears it again after that initial dungeon.
Yeah. Yeah, and it might be a comfortability thing, and it might be just a cultural thing, like a burqa or a yarmulke sort of situation
Yeah,
where,
that's what I
um,
would compare it to. Yeah,
yeah, that's probably what I would say is kind of happening there a little
yeah.
bit. It's tough to really like. I'd have to go back and see what her brother says. What was her brother's name again? I always forget. Um,
Um,
he also feels like he could be a player character too. Because of
maybe.
his design. As his design looks like, okay, you look like a main character sort of thing.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
I don't remember his
I
names.
thought he might be a party character
I did
at some point
too.
until
Yeah,
you met Yufa, and then you're like, oh, okay, no, this is going to be it.
yeah,
Which is fine. I prefer Yufa. I think she's far more interesting character than her
yeah,
brother.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, like you said, like she's on this like sacrificial quest to like save her country or her island, her people, you know. And when she finally gets up to it, and initially, like you said, she doesn't have the strength to go kind of pull through. She it's kind of due to like the environment, the anxiety, the magla kind of hanging in the air, which I want to talk about at some point too. It's a tough environment to kind of forge along by herself. She gets like halfway through there, and you kind of have to meet her and then soldier on with her, right?
yeah.
But she uses that third eye to kind of direct her. And they say the third eye is not just like they don't use it to see. It's to see the traces of magla
Hmm.
in their environment, basically. Like they're very magically attuned people, and they use it kind of like as a beacon to kind of just to sense where things are kind of coming through the motion of the ocean. Like magla is a big part of this game. It's the life force, if you will. It's the magic in the air. It's the air that you breathe, sort of thing, that kind of exists throughout the game. But in Yufa's case, it's like actually a manifestation of that, where she's actually seeing it in kind of like a physical way, which is really cool. Um, I liked her eyes being purple. I thought that was really attractive, really cool looking. She's the only character that has purple eyes in the game. It's really cool looking.
Oh yeah.
Um, I didn't like her green pants that much. I was like, this is clashing. It's fine.
Hmm.
Um, but as a character, under character design, I thought it was very
I
strong.
think
Her
her
with her helmet.
design is supposed to be kind of awkward. I think she's supposed to come
Yeah,
off like as a very awkward character. And
yeah, I
so
agree. I agree. I love her helmet though. I think her helmet's just so cool looking.
yeah, I
Um,
think in a like a Persona game, she would have more of like a like a curvaceous design, like
oh, almost
accentuating
certainly.
body parts.
Yeah,
But here
yeah.
they're going for more like like a more almost like I want to say like a realistic, like what this girl would actually be wearing with her
Sure.
upbringing, with her heritage, with her
Hmm.
position as a priestess. Like yeah, she's gonna be awkward. She's gonna be not knowing much of the outside world. So obviously she's gonna wear things that clash, things that don't really go
Yeah,
well together. So
Yeah, she's not like she doesn't. She's not part of the outside world really. She's very insular. The island itself is insular. Like,
yeah,
her brother is, coming from Etria to visit, and kind of like, well, initially, doesn't he? He's part of like being a candidate almost, right?
yeah.
I
No,
forget.
he was. He was
Yeah,
one of the last
yeah,
like 20 or so candidates. Like he
yeah.
made it way up there.
He made it very far, yeah.
Yeah,
But it was to curry favor for his people, right? He didn't really have interest in the actual election
yeah.
itself, as far as I understood, because he doesn't,
He
he's
drops
not
out.
interested.
No, he drops out because the church says that they have to give away divine relics, which is the objects that their people worship, and give them
Hmm.
to the church because the church says that they belong to the church.
Right, right, right.
And so
That's his
that's why he
impetus for
drops
actually
out.
leaving.
Yes.
Yeah, that's his impetus for leaving. And they're like, oh yeah, they're actually attacking our culture right now. They're like,
Yes.
it's like the British storming like,
Yes.
Egypt, where they're taking a bunch of artifacts that are important to them and their culture.
Yeah,
It's like
and
that.
you can even see it in like the in the opera house when they do the presentation. They talk
Uh-huh.
about how, oh yeah, we had some conversations with some Mustari and we were able to get these divine relics to
Mastari, that's
show
right.
off.
Mastari, that's their name. Yeah,
Yeah, we got
yeah.
these divine relics that we can show off to you guys. So we had
Hmm. Hmm.
really good conversations with them. We really opened them up to Sanctism. It's like,
I'm sure they really
yeah,
converted them there. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. The Mastari leader was probably like, yeah, okay, we need to get the F out of here. This is crazy, crazy times. He's basically like, yeah, yeah, you're definitely right. I forgot about that. He was like, yeah, I got to drop out because they're literally attacking my culture and religion right
yes,
now. And
yes.
yeah,
That was the
yeah,
whole
and
like crux of like that whole thing was
yeah.
to
Well,
um,
it's the entire like again impetus for heading to the island in general is to get the staff right
mhm.
from
The
the
lance.
temple.
It's a lance.
The lance, sorry, the lance.
Yeah.
Yes, the lance to kind of bypass the royal magic. And um, it's interesting that Luis tasked them to do it. He's like, yeah, kind of prove your favor to me. I'm not like really interested in this, but if you can get this, no one's ever gotten it, but if you get this, I'll consider having you join us. I found that flippant note very interesting because he's like,
He doesn't think he
he's
needs it.
he doesn't think he needs it, and he's also non-committal about it, so that when you actually get it done, he's like, okay, I got another tool in my arsenal, where I'm able to use this to my advantage if they do in fact get it, and come
And
through.
it's more so he didn't think he needed it from the protagonist because he was just gonna bomb the island himself and get it
Yeah,
himself.
he was actually going to go in and take it
He's just gonna
anyway,
carpet
but
bomb the whole island and take it. Yeah.
it was a eventuality either way. He's like, I was going to take this, but
Yeah.
like, you took it a little easier than it probably would have been for
Yeah.
me. So, well, like you said, he's confident in his abilities. He thinks he can get it done, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But he's just like, yeah, I could use you. You seem like a very formidable um, foil to me. Having you on my side can only be beneficial because he doesn't
Yeah.
quite know your aims yet.
He doesn't know your
Um,
aims. Yeah, that's like the big
yeah,
thing. He
that's the
knows
one
that
thing
you're
that like
against him,
Luis.
but
Yeah,
he doesn't know your aim, so he wants to know your aims.
yeah, that's the thing about Luis is he's always one step ahead, but until like story events actually take place regarding you, he doesn't see you coming like that.
Hmm.
Like he's so far ahead of you at the beginning of the game, and even throughout, like as you're currying favor, as you're getting higher and higher up the rankings, he doesn't see you as like an interesting um, opponent at
Yeah.
all. He sees it purely as him and Forden. Like nothing else is important really,
Yeah.
and he hates Fordham with a passion actually because of the entire Veil issue, right?
Yeah.
With him being an Elda, and that's also really interesting. I think it's an inelegant way to do it where they got into the Veil stuff where the lady's just literally lore dumping you, but what she's saying is really interesting,
Yeah.
um, and the revelation of Luis being, an Elda is really
Hmm.
powerful, But not to get too sidetracked, where we were talking about Yufa and the Mistari. You mentioned the Mistari being the race. I couldn't, for the life of me, remember what the names were. So on the whole, for every race, we have It's the Bastari, the Nydia, the Ishkia, the Rogue, the Clamar, the Elda. Am I missing one? I think that's everyone, isn't it? I feel like I'm missing one though.
No,
Um,
Parapus.
Parapus, yes,
Yeah.
Parapus. All these peoples. There's so many. It's not just like divided up by upper, middle, lower class. It's not that. It's literally like a caste system.
Yeah.
In like India, it feels like that. Everyone has a tier of like you have this ceiling, you can't exceed it because of your background, your parentage,
Yeah.
whatever. Even people that are mixed, as like a Maria, she is not. Even though rogues and Ishkia are, they curry more favor than the Parapus does, for instance, where they're seen as bottom feeders. Um, or I guess what's Heismay's
Ujif.
uh Ujif, and then the oh my gosh, the elf ones with the furry ears. What are their names?
Oh no, the they're
Resant.
Rusant. Yeah, the Rusant are like just one tier below the Clamar. Like the
Right, right,
Rusant
right,
are
right.
right up there with the Clamar.
Yeah, but what I was saying, I was forgetting like the name, I should say.
Yeah.
I didn't add the Resant and yeah, Ujif, that's right.
Yeah.
The point is there's there's a ton of different races, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they all feel really distinct from
Mm-hmm.
one another, not just in design but in background. And it feels like one of the only times recently where, like, when you make a fantasy setting, you're at risk of aping or making generic something that you've seen before, like a dwarf's a dwarf, an elf's an elf.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing this version of a fantasy world, you get your normal typical setting where it's like knives and magic and stuff, but the spins on that and the different genuses of the races are really interesting. And I think the art direction is so strong that they feel fresh and new.
Yeah.
Like, they're all like anthropomorphic, right? Every race is. Um, it's not like a Mass Effect where there are truly alien races where they don't have a face necessarily. You're like speaking to like this amorphous blob that can speak English.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in this game, everyone looks akin to a human, but not like us as humans, akin to a human, but not quite.
Yeah.
Everyone is capable of speech. Everyone, different backgrounds, different stylings, but everything feels really fresh and new in metaphor. And I
Yeah.
really like that because it's hard to set yourself apart from other fantasy games and fantasy settings, right?
Yeah. I think
Um,
also the like I did notice that like the facial like designs of the characters, like depending on their tribe, they would look similar. Like Rusant, I felt like had like sort of similar like facial structures, facial designs. Clamar's had sort of like similar facial
mhm.
structures, facial sort of
You mean from person to
designs.
person for the most
Yeah,
part? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I
I get what you're
think that
saying.
the only like dissonance I saw in that was that I felt like they made Luis look a lot like Stroll, like have similar facial
Yes,
features, and then
yes,
to
I could see that.
reveal that he's not a Clamar, I found that to be kind of like disingenuous.
Yeah, yeah, I see what you're saying. I think that's just an art direction thing.
Yeah.
They're making him super big bad and really attractive. Like he's supposed to be like the magnetic pull that's
Yeah.
tying the entire story together. So I think they're straight up just designing a character for that. I
Yeah.
do agree with you though. Like there's a uniformity to the races that you see when it comes to like a
Hmm.
face structure or something like that. Like
I
Basilio and Fidelio look very similar to each other
Yeah.
in face structure, not
Yeah.
just for being brothers, but you see those race features, right?
Yeah,
Those
the
racial features.
Parapus in general, I think, have like similar, like facial features. I think the only one
Yeah,
that
like
kind of throws
Katharina.
me off is Fabienne. I don't think that Fabienne quite
Uh
matches
huh.
the designs of. So I wonder if there's like maybe she has some Clamar lineage because her facial structures almost looked Clamar to me, but
Yeah, she had like facial tattoos, didn't she? That's didn't she? I want to say she did. Or
she
am
has
I
some
am I
kind of
wrong?
tattoos maybe, but
Because that's the thing about the rogue specifically. They
the
have facial
Rogue and the
tattoos like
Ishkia, because the
Yes.
Ishkia have like the sort of like the teardrop
Like teardrop,
things.
yeah. And like the rogue kind of have like these lines of tattoos. Like
Yeah.
Forden has that specifically.
Yep.
Even Maria has kind of a small mix of that.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
it doesn't manifest on her face, but like you can see how she could be a rogue as well,
Hmm.
because of Grius.
It's her like her eye color and eye
Eyes.
structure.
Yes.
Yeah, you
Yes.
can see
Yes.
the rogue in that.
For sure. She doesn't look like an Ishkia,
Yeah,
in terms of actual feature.
facial
Um,
features. Yeah.
yeah, I think that attention to detail is really interesting, and it sets apart their world from others.
Hmm.
From a Tolkien, from a Fantasy Star, or from a Persona, whatever you want to say, any type of from a Final Fantasy, really, even
Yeah.
specifically. Final Fantasy is different because every game is so different from game to game. There are different races being included in that. It's not as uniform as like a different, like a Tales series is, or something, um, where there are different settings, different worlds for every game,
Yeah.
with rare exception. But Metaphor, it feels really fresh and new, with the designs of the characters. It was nice to go in and go like, okay, am I going to see a bunch of elves in here that call themselves something different? That's what I thought the Resant were.
Yeah.
But really they're not. They're really very different.
Yeah, they don't even have the stereotypical trappings of elves. The
Yeah.
Rasan are more like militaristic in this
Yes.
setting.
Yes. They're not like
generals.
they're not like haughty and mysterious individuals that are
Yeah.
trying to stab you in the back, like elves are usually like that in like The Witcher, and in The Witcher it's a little different also too. But like in the Lord of the Rings it's like
Yeah.
that, with like the wood elf king and stuff.
Yeah.
Um they're kind of off-putting and aloof.
Yeah.
She's not like that at all. Um yeah, I love the way Metaphor designs its world, and the characters that inhabit it, right? Um, I guess, like, we talked about the cast system. We talked about the sporting cast. We talked about, um, you know the classes and everything. The last two things I really want to talk about with you are, first of all, I want to talk about Sanctism, right? That is a major through
Yeah,
line through the entire
kind of talked
game.
about it a little bit, but
We've kind of talked a little bit about it, but I really wanted to get into it with Forden specifically, and I also wanted to talk about your character, the main character of Metaphor, which we'll talk about that first, because we've talked about Sanctism a little bit, so I kind of wanted to talk about Will as a character first, because if you don't if you don't name him, he's like a default Will.
yeah.
So we'll talk about Will in that way. He's the main character. He's the prince. You find out. Um, I liked the tweaks they did with you being the main character. Having him putting a voice to his thoughts is really impactful, especially
Yeah.
since you're one of the most important characters in the game.
Yeah.
Like in some ways, Persona feels like a cipher. And like the Legend of Zelda, you feel like a cipher. Like you're this lens that you use to peer through the world. And this, you're actually talking. I like
Well,
that change.
I want to kind of stop you there. I think you might be misunderstanding something, because you are
Okay.
not the main character. You are guiding the
No.
main character.
Yeah,
You're
listen, I understand.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're the
yeah.
seeker that
Yes,
is
yes.
guiding this character throughout the thing. So they don't want you
Yeah.
to at least I think the intent here of the developers of the story is to have you be a guide for this main character, much like Gallica is a
Yeah.
guide for this main character. They don't necessarily want you to self-insert into this
Yeah,
story
sure.
as much as possible. So I think that's like it should be like a
Right.
guiding thing.
I mean
For
it purely in a gameplay sense, where you're driving this character, sure,
Yeah.
but like they're speaking. What I'm saying is they're speaking. Like in Persona, they're a blank slate
Right.
for the most part.
But in Persona, you are like I believe the developer intent is for you to self-insert. So it's kind of interesting how they, because they aren't expecting you to self-insert onto this character. Now
Sure.
they open up that creative design space to say, okay, now we can put a voice to this character. Now we can voice this character's thoughts. Now this character gets to have their own thoughts. because they're not the player, they're
Yes.
guided by the player. So
Well, this specifically, what you're talking about, manifests in metaphor with a second name, your name in
yes,
metaphor. That's what you're getting at, I think,
yes,
is what you mean.
yes, and
Where
that's
you are driving,
you're
you're
part of
driving
the
the main
story too.
protagonist.
Your name is part of the story as
Yeah.
well. You show up
Yes.
in actual like um, lore important documentation
Yeah.
in
Hmm.
the academia, and at the
Yes.
end that you get kind of like a thank you for guiding the character.
Yeah.
They want you to make sure that you know, no, you're not supposed to self-insert onto this character. That you are the guide for this character,
Yeah. And
because then that
yeah.
opens it up for them to do things that you're talking about, where they give a voice to this character and they give
Right.
thoughts to this character, and he is his own character. Protagonist is his
Yeah.
own character, whereas in a
With this-
Persona game, he doesn't get to
Yeah.
be his own character.
For sure. And with the advent of the second name, they are insinuating that you are driving a protagonist and
Yes.
you're not becoming a protagonist.
Yes.
I totally get what you mean. I think purely what I mean in a gameplay sense, I liked having the main character talk.
Yes.
Like in full sentences to other party members, and they're not just thinking to themselves and exclaiming in little menu bubbles and blurbs like in Persona 5 where it's like, I should write something. Take your time. Like it's not like that. In this he's like talking to
Yes.
his friends, which I really liked.
Yeah.
I liked having that change.
And they
you know?
gave him I think they gave him an interesting voice. Like it's
Yes.
the type of voice that you wouldn't expect a main.
It's like
character
pretty
to have.
effeminate, honestly. Yeah, it's a little effeminate.
I wouldn't even go effeminate. It's just kind of like an awkward voice. I think he comes more so
Sure.
as awkward than effeminate to me. At
Yeah.
least.
I think the voice has an effeminate affectation,
Sure.
but it does come off as awkward as well.
Yeah,
I agree
I
with
think
you
it's
there.
a mix of like that sort of. He's just an awkward sort of kid, and that you
Yeah.
can see that with the kinds of conversations that you don't guide him through, right? He just has some really awkward sort of dialogue sometimes, and even some of his dialogue options come off as awkward
Yeah.
sometimes. So
Yeah, it kind of manifests pretty clearly with him not knowing who he is really. And the story kind of culminates with him being the prince, obviously.
Yeah.
But the projection of the book kind of giving you life in a way, and becoming a vessel for a cursed prince, I guess, and kind of like learning this experience and kind of gathering people along the way to return to the body where you're a vessel. I think that's really interesting, and I love the way they did it. And some people will be like, "Oh, it's too convoluted. This doesn't make any sense." And at that point, like, I just throw up my hands and I go, like, you know what? It's kind of just magic at that point.
yeah,
Like, I think the story idea is really neat, where you are the prince in spirit, but you're not in actuality until you return back to the self and become one.
yeah,
And your hair even changes too, where you become the prince. I like that actual visual change where you were like a vessel with blue hair, and then you return to the prince and become an actual embodiment with white.
yeah. And I really like the day transitions change from
Yes.
the prince
Yes.
being shrouded in thorns to the prince just kind of lying there once
Yep.
once Rella passes, and
Yep.
and then
Yep.
finally to that image of just Will and Gallica just sleeping.
Yeah.
I
Time marches
really
on.
like. I didn't get to talk enough about the relationship between Will and Gallica. I actually really did like that.
So yeah, we're talking about Will. I think that is
that's
you talk to Gallica almost more than anybody. So yeah, get into it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I think Gallica is a really important, because usually that she is like the mascot character, right, for this game. Like
He is
Yeah.
in this one, yeah.
yes, so usually a mascot character is sort of like the mouthpiece for a protagonist character, right? Like they
Yeah.
usually are like the like when push comes to shove, the mascot character is sort of
Yeah.
like the this is what we need to do. Hi, I'm the mascot character. Here's how you do persona. Here's all this stuff.
Well, it's
Whereas,
interesting before you continue. It's interesting because they allude to this in the trophy description for Gallica, where you're talking to her about voice lines, right? It's the whole Futaba thing from Persona 5. They do the "Hey, listen"
they do.
achievement, and
Yes, I
it's
have
literally
the
like
Hey
a
Listen
Navi
achievement.
callback.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a
Yep.
Navi callback or a Tattle
Yep.
callback
I
from
love that.
Zelda, which I found
Yep.
really funny. But yeah, continue.
Yeah. So, yeah, she really is just both your Navi, your
Yes. Yeah.
Morgana. She's all of that wrapped up in one. And
Right. Right.
but she doesn't exactly know what's going on. Whereas like usually a guide character knows what's going on,
Yeah.
and she doesn't know what's going on, and she's upset about that. She's distraught about that in her support, her story mandated support sections.
Yeah, because she has a
um,
bond too, but it's only story progressed. Yeah.
it is, yeah, but I I find those conversations to be just as interesting as most,
Hmm.
if not more interesting than most of the bonds in the game. So
Sure. Yeah. She's the
because
closest to you. Yeah.
yeah, and so I find it really interesting. And yeah, so I think that having her be an insecure sort of guide, and then like growing into this full on guide for the protagonist character, and be part of
Hmm.
the team, in her own way, is, I think it's a really good progression.
Yeah, for sure. I think the performance of Gallica is extremely strong too.
Yeah.
Alejandra Reynoso does an amazing job. I think she's one of the highlights of the game specifically.
Yep.
And it's tough because with guide characters, you can really risk annoying a player,
Yeah.
right? And I don't feel like they ever tumble into that with her.
No.
She's very, like she might say something sometimes that's a little much, or she might be like, "Oh, we got to get this dungeon over with," but like aside from the auspices of being a guy character of kind of urging you to the next objective point or whatever, I think her characterization is really strong. She's kind of like a guide Tinkerbell in some ways,
Yeah.
and like you said, she is the mascot character. And at some point I was wondering if they would do a Hook thing, if you've seen the movie Hook, where they actually like enlarge Tinkerbell to kind of hang out with Peter Pan. I wondered if they would do that, and they never
Mm-hmm.
did.
They always
I think that would be
alluded to
interesting.
it because they had like an equipment screen for her and everything.
Yes.
And
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah.
they've done in the past to where they've had characters in Persona games be stuck in like the sort of guide role, and then it's like,
Mhm.
oh no, now we have a replacement for you, so now you can go ahead and not be stuck in that guide role anymore.
Right.
They did that in
Yeah,
Persona 3 at
like in
least.
Persona 3
Yeah.
specifically with
Yeah.
that the switch of the guide role there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's what I think about too. Um yeah, on the whole she's a very good I think that's what I love about Metaphor. Like you've seen a lot of things in their other games and even in other JRPGs. But it's all done way better here in almost every way
yeah.
for every personality you encounter. From Stroll being the best friend character to Calica being the guide character, to flipping the script where you think Heisman's a mascot and he's a strong individual,
Yeah.
and Heisenberg actually being a goofball. Like the twists they do on their characters is really surprising, and I
Yeah.
like that. This game feels like it's about something, and it's bold, and the directions it leans in are very adult, and like it feels like a moment in time for RPGs for me. And to kind of wrap it up a little bit, I mean, I don't want to finish here necessarily because a couple things I want to talk about more, but in kind of like in short for Metaphor and how I feel about it, having finished it, talked about it with you a little bit, 72 hours in, and completed it, I think it's on that top RPG ever scale for me. Like
Yeah.
it's up there with Final Fantasy VII. It's up there with for you and Octopath Traveler, right?
Yeah. It
Um,
is. Yeah.
it's up there with like a Final Fantasy VI. Like whatever you want to say. It's already there, and it's shocking to me.
Yeah.
That a game came on so strong this year, and it hit me so hard. I did not expect it. Like at the beginning of the year, I was like, yeah, I will play the next thing that Hashino makes, right? Because he's a legend.
Yeah.
I will play anything that Atlas puts out at this point because Sega and Atlas have been killing it this year. specifically with the Yakuza stuff, with this, um, with the amount of like Atlas RPGs that they've come out with. It's actually
Yeah.
pretty staggering, you know. And I'm interested to see how that cadence kind of continues, like with the Persona 4 remake, with a Persona 6 announcement. Like, where do we go from here? Like with another metaphor at some point, since they have laid the brick, you know,
Yeah.
they've laid it. I wonder how it all shakes
I
out.
think
You
a
know.
Persona 6 really needs to borrow heavily from and learn lessons from Metaphor if it's going
Yes.
to measure up to the level of
Yes.
quality in storytelling and writing and world building that
Yep.
Metaphor has brought to the table. I think that Persona 6 needs to mature the series. I think that's where the series needs to go in a new entry. I think they need to, you know, be more open to having those sort of like mixed age parties. You know, they can have the high
Yes.
school protagonists, you know, whatever. But I think it'd be interesting to see what a Persona could do with that sort of mixed age group party setting,
Yeah.
and just foregoing the dating sim aspects altogether would be interesting to
Hmm.
see where they could what they could do in that design space.
Yeah, and with the Persona 6 and with the Persona series in general, in some ways it feels beholden and a slave to its formula. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the worst thing about it. And it's the best thing about it, right? And if you don't like those things, kind of too bad. I feel like they're going to just do it again. Like
Yeah,
it's a very niche. Like Persona is extremely niche. It's a niche of niche. Like you're playing a Shin Megami Tensei game, which is niche already. And even though Persona has outgrown that series in terms of popularity, akin to like a Silent Hill 2 outgrowing the popularity of its franchise and Final Fantasy
yeah,
7 being bigger and looming larger than its franchise, it feels like it is a thing unto itself, and they can't stray too far away to kind of avoid. They don't want to alienate the fan base they have that made even like a 5 so popular. Like
yeah,
the school setting feels integral to a Persona,
yeah,
you know, because every game is based upon that. So like, what can they do to make it interesting? I think the school setting is important, right? I think the next step they should take in a Persona is putting it in college, for instance. Like
yeah,
that would be the way to go, I think, because you can have these mature relationships, and you can foster these friendships in a high school like setting, but it's in an aged up sort of way, like a
yeah.
college. I don't know what you think, but
Yeah, no, I would be fine seeing that. That would be interesting to see. I just want them to do something a bit different because it is getting a
yeah,
bit samey. I think doing the
yeah,
high school thing over and over again. But
yeah,
and I think they could have like even more sort of mature discussions like a metaphor does if they
yeah,
aged up their cast a little bit. Um, and also, I think that's why a metaphor needed to exist is because they were stuck in that loop of we have to do the same thing over and over again with a persona. Whereas if we
yeah.
make a new series, then we can do whatever we want.
That's kind of what got Hashino to break off and make Studio Zero in general, was
Yeah,
that fact of I don't want to do the same thing over and over. Persona has, he basically he directed 3, 4, and 5, like the
yeah,
ones that people think about,
yeah,
and he was involved with 1 and 2 in some way I don't understand. He wasn't a directorial capacity, I want to say there, but he went and took the main components of the team that made up Persona 5 and went off to make Metaphor,
yeah,
right? He even took Shigenori Sojima with him, like the character artist for Atlas RPGs with him,
yeah,
Um, like, yeah, he wanted to do something different too, where it's not a malaise necessarily, but it's the fact of like, hey, we're doing this setting too much. I want to branch out, tell new stories with the things that we've learned along the way. Like, and what you get out of it is a metaphor, right? Um, yeah. I guess, yeah. Any other closing thoughts on Hoshino moving? I guess.
No, no, I think yeah, it's an interesting thing for sure. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes you have to do that for creative freedom. So
Yeah, I wonder if they do another metaphor next, or if they do another genre next. Like if they do a sci-fi take on Atlas, RPGs. I wonder if they do that.
I'd be surprised if they don't do at least one more metaphor before they
Eh,
move on.
okay, maybe. Yeah, it could be. I think whatever they do, it will be good.
Yeah,
I hope it's another metaphor because I love the world, love everything about the game,
yeah,
pretty much. If it was for my money, this game winning both major outlets game of the year is pretty telling. It's sold extremely well. It's not up to like a five, where five sold like 9 million. It's not like
hmm
that. This is probably sold about two or three, maybe four.
it's a little bit
It was
more
very
niche than
popular.
even a Persona, you know.
It's more niche, and it's also a new franchise. So
Yeah,
you are, with every successful, iteration, you're either losing fans or you're gaining them, and it's tough, to know where that's coming from. Like for instance, the Final Fantasy VII remake stuff. Like the first one's always going to be the biggest one, until like you reach the end of that series. Um, you're already in a niche because you're focusing on seven, but you're also doing a remake of seven for people that have newer consoles, right?
yeah,
Like it's so compartmentalized that way, where it's an exclusive treat for people that are interested. Metaphors like that a little bit, not in terms of like console exclusivity or anything like that, but in terms of like people being interested in a niche. It's like a niche of a niche, right?
yeah,
Um, but it's popular enough. I feel like with a second entry, um, taking the quality of life stuff and making it better, new setting, new story, new characters. I think it would be really good seeing them take another crack at it.
yeah.
So I guess the last thing I want to end with it's kind of a good wrap up point. I think is the Magla stuff, the lifeblood of the of everything that revolves around metaphor and sanctism even too. I guess we could talk about a little bit about that. Um, Anxiety is a huge kind of metric in this game for honestly like the world states, for the magic use, for the environment, for the atmosphere. It all ties together into Luis's grand plan, right? To harvest everyone's anxiety,
Yeah.
to kind of create enough chaos where people are basically feeding him um, this unlimited source of magical energy, um, where anxiety is literally, or Magla is literally anxiety that kind of wafts in the air, and it's a physical manifestation of people's fears when it comes to the crown, the government, and the state of their country, right? And the lance that he has, right? Um, well, it's not the lance, the actual like kingly
The
staff he
staff,
has,
yeah, yep, the
yeah,
royal scepter.
is able to harvest it, right? And
Yes.
that's how the king is able to enact all the royal magic stuff, how he's able to kind of like keep track of people's thoughts about the election and who's winning and who's not winning, that sort of thing. I guess what's your take on Magla as a concept, in kind of an anxiety base, and how it kind of dovetails into the themes of the game? Because I feel like it's maybe the most important part of the function of metaphor, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Because it's basically if you do like all of the side quests with like the dragons and you fight the. Did you do that with like you fight the shadow version of the protagonist?
No, I never did.
Okay,
It was one of those
that's
things I kind of
really
ran out of time
important
with.
to some of the
Yeah.
world building, but
Okay. When I go back again, I will definitely see that because it's trophy related.
yeah.
Um, it was one of those things I ran out of time in the
So
calendar. So
yeah, basically, the royal scepter was created to harvest those anxieties and use them in a good fashion for the betterment of the country essentially. But
harvest it.
in doing that, they're essentially making it to where people can't use their own magla, to produce magic themselves, so like
Uh-huh.
something like a mage academy doesn't really work out because people don't have enough magla stored up to actually cast things themselves.
Uh-huh.
So when the royal scepter goes away, and then all of a sudden, there's no more need for igniters because the igniters at that point are just putting a limit on people's actual magic potential because everyone in
Yeah.
this world is capable of doing magic
Yeah.
with their innate magla, and the way they explain the Magla isn't, in its negative form, it is anxiety and
Hmm.
fear, but in its positive form, it's anxiety to press one towards change, towards hope, towards a better future.
Yeah. Um, and the like I said, the Sanctus Church is twisting those messages with the sale of igniters, where they're saying like you can't do magic without these, so
Yeah.
buy them. You
Yep.
know, be it on the black market or whatever else. We sell them all around Grand Trad. Like, get a part of this, and they're basically like monetizing magic,
Yep.
right? And the potential of it when they're really limiting it. You
Yeah.
know, it's like McDonald's saying, "Hey, we have nutritious food, but really it's kind of killing you in some way because it's not what you need." You know,
Yeah.
it's not a great comparison, but it's something similar to that.
Sure.
Where they're saying it's one thing and it ends up being another. You
Yeah.
know, or they're telling you half truths or white lies about it, right? Um, and kind of like wrapping up the Sanctus Church idea. Forden wants control societally and socioeconomically over the land, and we talked about Luis being the most dangerous aspect of the story in terms of a impending doom. Forden has like actual like change he's trying to enact or to keep the status quo, I guess.
Yeah.
Like he wants to further create a state of surveillance and unification under one banner,
Yes.
um, and that's his form of equality. Is you can be equal, but you got to believe the same thing and do what we
Well,
say.
I don't even think it's that. I disagree there. I think his message
Okay.
is that everyone belongs in their own caste, and if you don't fit in with the church's, um, essentially their promoted tribes, then you're nothing. Is essentially what the church
Okay.
believes.
So
If
yeah,
you're a
like
lesser
perpetuating the
tribe,
status quo.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you're
Okay.
a lesser tribe, then you don't get equality with the greater tribes.
I
That is
guess
what
I
the
guess what I'm
church
saying
preaches.
is, yeah, I guess what I'm saying is a little bit of that is like get with the program or get the f out, like a little bit of that, um, and basically like you are what I say you are, sort of thing, you
Yeah.
know, and not who you believe yourself to be. Um, yeah, I definitely that makes more sense when you lay it out that way. I think I agree more with you having brought that up. But essentially, like monetizing magic, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of what that's their main export and import is that for the church, and that's why their coffers are so laden. Is
Yeah.
because of the sale of igniters. And actually, when you talk to Brigida, the merchant, like she is pretty tied up with the Sanctus Church because of it, because she sells igniters and she hates it, and she's too deep in. She can't extricate herself from this situation, right? And it kind of bites her in the end,
They steal
in the
her
rear
dog.
end a little bit. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and she kind of conscripts you to kind of take him out with her, right?
Yeah.
And to enact her sense of justice, right? Um, but yeah, like seeing how magic influences and manifests in different ways is really interesting throughout the game. With the Etria stuff and the temple being kind of coated in this like miasma of an anxious air, basically, where people are unable to trudge on because of it, um, and seeing it feed into Luis's stolen staff of the king, uh, to it, kind of getting ingrained into the election itself. The entire concept of Magla is throughout the game, um, and without it, your character wouldn't be exact. The form of the character that you normally drive would not be around without it.
Yeah.
Um, it's really important, but I like that they specifically say that it is anxiety. Like
Mm-hmm.
Magla is anxiety of the
Yep.
people, right? And it's another thing I talked about was this feels like a timely game for a timely time for us. Like we just came out of an election and we're headed into a new presidency, and whatever you think about that is your choice, whatever. Um, but the themes here feel very akin to what we've been tackling with in America,
Yeah,
you know,
a lot
and
of
the
anxiety.
anxieties targeted towards our government and its leaders
Yeah.
feels manifest in a metaphor, where there's a physicality to that same idea, Um, I just find like its themes very similar to what we have going on too, down to even a charismatic leader that will do anything to win, you know, be it good or bad, whatever
Yeah.
you decide. I'm not going
I
to
mean,
tell you your politics,
I
but
feel like there's multiple charismatic leaders that'll do anything to win in metaphor as well. Because I think both
yes, there is.
Forden and Louise, in their own ways, are these sort of charismatic leaders that both have their idea for, what the world should be, what the status quo should be, but both of them have, these sort of really twisted,
Mhm.
ideas of, what the status quo should be. And they're both,
Yeah,
it's this, it's just both, just
I
terrible options.
yeah, exactly. And you you mentioned, being akin to some of our political leaders. I just imagine Zorba as RFK Jr., which is a very funny thing to think about.
Anyways,
It kind
um,
of doesn't. It kind of works a little bit because he's like Luis's right hand man in some ways, but you're pretty misguided. But I guess you're trying.
yeah,
I don't know.
but
Yeah, he's like,
it,
I'm glad I resurrected you. I had a backup. um, yeah, yeah. I think Magla being the through line to the game is one of its most important aspects. But yeah, like I feel like we kind of talked about pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. I mean, in our regular podcast, we talked about the combat of the game and the archetypes and all that. So
yeah,
I feel like we don't have to really go over that again
no,
necessarily.
yeah, I mean, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning too. I think it's
Yeah.
one of the best implementations of a job system, and
Yes.
yeah, I think I like something like an Octopath or a Bravely Default maybe a little bit better personally, but
As a preference, yeah.
it it by no means detracts like the quality of this system. And
Mhm.
through the systems, I mean, it's pretty easy to make parallels to the actual like state of this world is probably a post-apocalyptic
Yeah.
Shin Megami Tensei sort of setting, right?
Yes. And they allude to this in some ways too
Yeah,
with
like
the
in the
Etria stuff.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so okay, so that's an Easter egg unto itself, where it's Etria for Etrian Odyssey, being the town from Etrian Odyssey 4, I want to say. I'm that's what I was that's what I heard. I've never played
Okay.
Etrian Odyssey. Um, but specifically in Shin Megami Tensei 5, where it is literally apocalyptic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it looks
Well,
the temple layout looks like that.
okay. Okay. It's
Um,
good to know.
very similar. Yeah, it's like decrepit
So I was
buildings
gonna
and
say most
yeah,
Shin Megami Tensei games are like apocalyptic. Like 4 is
like
also
3. Yeah,
very apocalyptic.
Nocturne
I
is
don't
I
know much
know, and
about 3, so but I have played 4. And
yeah,
4 is very very apocalyptic. I never played 5
4 is
though.
too. Four is also kind of has this school system, doesn't it? Like you're kind of like a or is
No.
it are you like an order? I'm not familiar.
Yeah, you basically come from heaven in 4 and you go
Oh,
down
okay.
to earth to bring order to
Okay.
earth essentially.
You're this order of characters, right?
Samurai essentially, like angel
Samurai. Okay, because
samurai, yeah.
I've seen the matching uniforms. I'm like, okay, they seem like some sort of like order or
Yeah,
school or
they're like
something.
an order of like angelic samurai is like the best way to put it, but
Interesting.
it's a
That's
very
really cool.
weird
I like
game.
that
It's a
idea.
very weird game, but
Yeah, I need to play 4. I have it on 3DS. I need to play
yeah.
that. I wish they would just bring like I like SMT enough. I played a decent amount of 5 and really enjoyed it. I have Vengeance on my PS5. If they would just bring all those forward, at least
Sure.
because they have Nocturne on there and they have
Nocturne is on
5
there,
now.
yeah.
Yeah, but they don't have 4 or Apocalypse on there.
Yeah.
On modern consoles. They really should bring
Yeah.
those forward. I think that'd be interesting. Um, but yeah, we kind of talked about where Metaphor goes from here and all that. I I think it'll be a while before we get a new Atlas game, like an Atlas proper game. I mean, I think they're probably going to do Persona 4 Reload or whatever the heck you want to call it next, and it's probably going to be a few years down the line, probably 2 or 3 years. I bet you they've already started working on it. And I think it was maybe I'm talking out of my rear end here, but I think it was the Nvidia leak where they talked about Persona 4, um, like remake. I want to say, along with the Final Fantasy 9 remake stuff. If not, I've heard it was coming from somewhere. But there's some filings saying like, yeah, this is going to be pretty close, behind a 3 and a Metaphor,
Yeah.
and kind of talking about the Switch 2 as well. I think Metaphor will get ported there, along with like Reload and all their new stuff. I think the
Sure.
Switch 2 is more than capable to
Sure.
run as
Yeah.
something like this. Like Metaphor is not the most resource intensive game of all time,
No.
um, and a Switch 2 is pretty powerful. It's like a step below a PS5 or PS4 Pro, and for a handheld, it's not bad. It's like a 4-year-old mobile chip, technically, but for a possibly $400 or $500 handheld PC, it's pretty good. Or not PC, but a handheld console, it's pretty good. So I can see that it definitely happening. But yeah. Any closing thoughts on Metaphor in general? I feel like we really kind of got down in the dirt and nitty gritty with it.
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about kind of what I got out of the games, like sort of messaging and things like that. Like
Yeah,
my
please. Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
takeaways. I really
I
think
definitely
that the
talked about that.
game is it has multiple messages, multiple themes. I think one of the major themes is just you know the parties constantly going against a system that is against them and also against you know people who can't stand up for themselves. Like
Yep.
it's just a very oppressive system that keeps them locked in their caste, and the game is condemning that sort of practice. It's saying this is objectively morally incorrect, and you need to fight against a system like that. And so that's some pretty powerful messaging right
Yeah.
there, I think. And I think
Right.
another one of the major themes in that is that it's saying that no matter what your station in life is, what your lot in life, whatever, you can rise above it and become something better, something bigger, and you can dream and you can hope,
Yes.
and you can turn anxiety into hope is a big
Mm-hmm.
theme of the game. You
Yes.
just got to take that first step into the unknown and turn that
Mm-hmm.
anxiety into hope. So um,
Yeah. Yeah.
turn it into power. Yeah.
I mean, the game is about really powerful stuff. It's nice for a game to actually be about something amidst a industry where games are ephemeral and fleeting
Yeah.
and impermanent in some ways, with like a Concord coming and going, and service games like Marvel Rivals showing up, and those things are all fine and good when they work, but when you have a game that is supremely about something and is mature in its themes and made not made to impress but made to impart a message or multiple messages,
Yeah.
I think that's missing in today's gaming landscape, really. Like there's people doing it here and there, like Larian. They did it with Baldur's Gate
Sure.
3. They've done it with the Divinity games. Like those games are about something.
Yeah.
It's not just we made a cool RPG. Like they did that too, but like the story is genuinely affecting and the characterization is meaningful and well written, And this game is very I put it up there with the Baldur's Gate 3 in terms of my enjoyment. Like this surpasses that, I think, because it's more my style. I'm not a CRPG player.
Yeah.
I am more a JRPG styling person. Um, but in terms of like a quality level, it's right there. If not, it's probably I enjoyed this more than Baldur's Gate 3, and I love Baldur's Gate 3. That's one of the best games I've ever played. Metaphor's up there for me, just all timers already.
Yeah.
So I'll have to see where it actually ranks because I do keep a running list. But yeah, it's up there. So yeah. Anything else about the messages of the game you kind of wanted to talk about?
No, I just want to stress how important it is to not just take this game and just leave it on
Yeah.
shelf. You really do need to digest it and think about it. If
Yeah.
because this is the type of game that is really trying to break down prejudices, trying to break down
Yes.
barriers,
Hmm.
for people, and so
Yep.
it's just important to just digest, like try, to think about other walks of life, put yourself in other
Yes.
people's shoes. That's what this game is all
Hmm.
about. So, yeah,
And it's
just
yeah.
take that messaging
Yeah.
to heart. It's like,
Yeah, it's interesting too, not to get back into it again, but there was one piece of dialogue I remember where, you're talking about prejudices, you're talking about racial inequality. Even your party members struggle with that. Like
yeah,
whenever Basilio and Fidelio enter the picture, like Heisman wants nothing to do with them.
yeah.
Like nothing.
And
He's
Heisman
like,
himself is like a prejudiced race, but
yeah, he is. Yeah, exactly. Like he's a Ujeep, which is like bottom rung race, in Uchronia, and he sees the Parapus coming along. He's like, I am not going to hang out with this guy.
yeah,
So he comes around, but there's a wariness there even initially, um, that you see with another party member specifically, where you're like, oh, he's just judging him at face value. Like
yeah.
that's just what's happening. Like he's not even like getting to know him. He's like, I want literally nothing to do with him. You
And
can get
I
him away
mean,
from me.
that doesn't, make Heisman, morally wrong, individual.
It
It
doesn't make him
just
morally repugnant. It just makes him like
he just made a
a more
mistake.
interesting character.
Yeah,
And he made a mistake.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
They're
mistake, but it's
yeah.
it makes him a real character, right? It makes like yeah, he even someone like a Heisman can
Yeah.
make a mistake and be like, oh wow, I and then he does eventually grow to know Basilio, and he's like, yeah, okay, this they become like you see them together at the
Yeah.
like end post like game, like
Yep.
they're standing right next to each other. They're the only two of your like followers that are standing right next to each other, because like
Hmm.
then that's just like to signify how much they've like bridged that gap, that they're just able to work that closely together and be
Yeah.
comfortable with that. So
Because that gap
they
was
trust
not
each
a
other.
gap. It was a chasm.
Yeah,
Like
it was a
the
chasm.
fact
Yeah,
that
it was
they're
and it
yeah.
was just a perpetuated thing between their
Yeah.
two tribes. Like these tribes
Yeah.
aren't supposed to like each other, so I'm not supposed to like this tribe. And they
Yeah.
break that down by getting to know each other as individuals and realizing
Yeah.
we're not so different.
Yeah.
So
And it's so they basically like say that tribes are racist here, and
yeah,
sometimes that's different. Like tribes can be like, you're from this part of town, I'm from this part of town, but we're the same race. Like they literally say race and tribe is the same thing here.
yeah,
Um, and when you talk about games being about something, having a diverse party member or party with multiple different party members of different races is so important and so crucial
yeah,
to the storytelling in this game. I When we talk about this game being about something, you know, talking about reaching for a utopia and having equality between all peoples, it's something that is relevant today, and it
yeah,
always will be relevant as long as there's people. You
yeah,
know, um, you're gonna have people that just take people at face value and don't like them
yeah,
because of their background, because of their upbringing, because of who they are, what they look like, what color they are. And this game basically says like, turn the hate of your heart around, or become scarce. Like we don't want you here. We are to be inclusive, and it's okay to make mistakes, like a
yeah,
Heisman did. But the message being like, hey, no matter what race, creed, or belief you have, we can come together.
yeah,
Like that is one of the major messages of the game, and it is tantamount throughout, that these people have come together for one cause because they believe it to be right. um, I wish there was something like that in our world, something that could unite us under one banner that was like so incredibly right
yeah,
to kind of fight against. The last real, you know, movement like that was like a World War II, where there was like a superpower that was rising in Europe, and they went like, no, that's not okay. We need to come together and combat this foe.
hmm
Um, Different races, different people from backgrounds were coming to fight Hitler, basically.
Yeah.
You know, there hasn't been a uniting force like it since, and I think if we saw it again, it would probably be pretty terrible. But
Mhm.
you know, you wish it could be not as high stakes and people could just
Right.
get along.
Yeah.
Um, but that's just as long as there's people, there will be racism, unfortunately. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's tough because at the end, you know, talking about the plot specifically, they're like utopia is pretty impossible because people
Yeah.
are people and people are imperfect.
Yeah.
But as long as we strive to do the right things, you know, we can't necessarily make a utopia because even Moore says like a utopia doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like it
Every
just doesn't
character
exist.
agrees that that
Yeah.
utopia doesn't exist.
Like, but they talk about it like a goal to strive towards,
Yes.
yet it is a fantasy. You
Yes.
know, where the book is literally talking about it being a utopia, but it's a fantasy that people go like, "Oh, what book are you reading? Oh, that fantasy book? Okay."
Yeah.
Like that would never happen because that's crazy, you know. Uh, but it's a admirable goal to reach toward, even though you can't attain it. And so the actual movement of the party to achieve that goal is admirable, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that is another thing that this game is about is you know, class, race, and the divides that we even have in our lives. You know,
Yeah.
Metaphor is incredible, man. It is an incredible game. It's not just fun. It's not just well made. It's about something and it's important. And I
Yeah.
think it's one of the most important games I've ever played.
Yeah.
It feels very prescient. It's like I think Death Stranding's pretty clumsy, okay, and it's storytelling, but it felt like it was about something where it came out before COVID and then kind of like talked about COVID a little bit, where you know you're trying to kind of bridge the gap between peoples, and I kind of want to talk about Death Stranding at some point, probably before two comes out, a little bit, but and hopefully you would play it too and kind of get a feeling for it because you like interesting games like that.
Yeah.
But I digress. I think Metaphor is about something, and I think the game they wrapped around it is excellent, but the story is so interesting throughout and completely arresting. I haven't seen a game like it, and I don't know if I ever will
Yeah.
until maybe the second one. It's truly special. It is a truly special video game, and it's an all timer for me already, plain and simple. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, if you told me, like, even just like, in 2023 that there was going to be a game that, tried to say something really important about, racial inequality,
yeah,
like in a
yeah.
JRPG of all things, like
It's
I
insane.
would have
Yeah,
played
it's
you.
insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, from a a very progressive idea from a very insular place in the world.
Yeah.
Like Japanese people, there's basically a lot of Japanese people in Japan. Like there's
Yes.
not a lot of white people, there's not a lot of Hispanic people, Chinese, like they are very insular in that in the mainland, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
It's just the reality of
so
it.
the fact that they're talking about these topics, governmental, racial, societal, is really important, and I think
Yeah.
it's a huge step forward for the genre and them as a studio in
It's important
storytelling.
to bring it up, to highlight it, and to,
Yeah.
like, yeah, it needs to be talked about more.
Yeah.
More
Mhm.
deeper discussions need to be had surrounding
Yeah.
this sort of topic, for sure.
And it took me
Gaming
aback when I
sphere.
initially, yeah, it took me aback when I initially played it. I
Yeah.
didn't know that this is what this game was about.
Yeah.
You know,
I wouldn't
they
guess.
hid. Yeah, I wouldn't say they hid like a political commentary in their game because it's not. They made the
No.
subtext text at some point,
Yeah.
but they they presented it in a fascinating way. You know.
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna be, deceived. You like right off the
No, no, no,
bat,
no, no, no.
within like the
No,
first
definitely
two
not.
hours, you can already tell that like there's racial inequality in this world, right?
From the
So
jump,
if
pretty
you
much.
don't want
Yeah.
to hear that, you can get your Steam refund or whatever, within the first 2 hours, I think. So
Yeah, if you don't want to hear that and you think, this game is woke or whatever, you're not the right person to play this game anyway. Like,
yeah,
you need the help. I mean, honestly, if you think that and you don't want to play this game, you have a problem because I think it could really change your mind,
yeah, I think this
or
is
open
the
your
type of
eyes.
game that somebody who
Yeah,
doesn't want to hear that message should play to get a better
right.
perspective. But
in some ways, like this is preaching to the choir for me and you because this is something that's just truly what we believe in.
Yeah.
But for a person that goes like, "This is woke," whatever. Um, oh, they have a tolerance stat. Like, crucify them. Like, come on. You know what I mean? I've heard this though, from people.
Really? Oh my gosh.
Yes, yes.
I'm not
But
raising
the
my
thing is, like
tolerance stat. I would never do that. Oh
the
my
thing
gosh.
that is different though is it's been so universally acclaimed by players and critics. You know, it feels like it's broken through in a main way, in a
Yeah.
mainstream way,
Yeah.
even. You know, with it winning Game of the Year from IGN and GameSpot, and it doing really well on every platform it's released on.
It
You
should
know,
have won
I think
Game of the Year on Game Awards.
I do too, and that was a popular vote too because Astrobot is inherently more accessible. That's just
Yeah.
what it is,
That's just
and it's fine. But Astrobot's not about something. That's
No.
not the point of it. It's made to be fun. It's a toy.
Yeah.
Metaphor doesn't feel like a toy. It
I
feels
would have
like
liked
a
to see.
statue.
Yeah, I would have liked to see something that's, you know, we talk about games as art. That metaphor is a game as art. You know,
Yes.
Astrobot has art and has artistic
Mhm.
intent, but it's
Yeah.
not a game as art. Whereas metaphor
Yeah.
is a game as art. It's an art piece
Yeah.
that wants to speak to the audience and show them something through a unique lens.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a difference and there's a delineation that needs to be, remarked upon with that where all games have art in them. There's a lot of games that aren't art, just
Yeah.
straight up, Um, and there's very few games that reach this rarefied air where they are masterpieces of art in their genre
Yeah.
and metaphors there. I
Yeah.
really truly believe that.
Yeah,
So
I'd agree with that.
yeah, we loved it, man. Like, we don't do ratings here, but we both highly recommend it. And
It's
I
a
think everyone
masterpiece.
with,
That's our.
I think it really is, and I think everyone that has all five senses and hands to play it should play it.
Yeah.
And even if you don't, find a way to experience it. It is truly a cannot miss video game. I feel that strongly about this, about like a Silent Hill 2. I feel really strongly about that as well, especially with this remake. I really want you to play that remake because not to dive into that a little bit, it makes the original better,
Sure.
and I think you'll see that. So, and hopefully, if you do talk about it, we'll come to this forum again and really discuss
Yeah.
it because
Yeah.
we should. So that's been our. This is really truly a spoiler cast on Metaphor
Yeah.
ReFantazio, kind
Yeah.
of our full thoughts, And I think we're done talking about it. I feel like I said really everything I need to say, and that feels really good. Really good to finally talk about it because it hasn't been a burden to myself, but it's been like it's been a going concern for myself. I'm like, I really want Noah to finish this because I have a lot of a lot of stuff to say.
We. Yeah, we unpacked it, and in a good.
I think we really did truly unpack it. Yeah.
So.
We're going to have some categories. Metaphor is going to be involved in a lot of that. We will talk again slightly for like best new character, for a couple things from story stuff. We'll talk about it again a little bit, but if you really want to unpack everything that is Metaphor, I feel like this is a good way to do it. And if you reach the end of this, you have probably beaten the game because if not, you've been spoiled. So
Congrats.
that's how it goes. Congrats. I'm excited to do another deep dive on this. I think the next one we'll do, honestly, Noah, it might be Persona 3 Reload. I've actually put a fair amount of progress into it. So when I finish that, hopefully you'll get to it again at some point. And,
And if not,
we'll blow through it.
I'm very.
You know the
familiar
story
with-
anyway. It's not that big of a
I'm
deal.
very familiar. The only
But since
part
I've
I don't
never
know is
I've
that
never finished it.
DLC that Aegis or the Aegis DLC. I haven't played through that yet, so that's the only part that I would need a refresher on. But
Okay, I did buy that too, so
Yeah.
I would probably play that first before I jumped into that. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's really it for me. Anything else you wanna talk about? I guess
no,
yeah.
I've said my piece. I've done my soapbox. So
Yeah. I'm glad we did it this way instead of just me reading the review. I feel like we got a lot more out of this, so it's encouraging to kind of keep up with it. So yeah, if you're hearing this, it's dropping in between me going to vacation and then our previous podcast. So
Yep.
when I return, we will be talking about Game of the Year stuff if you're listening to this chronologically, and we'll have Metaphor there again. So Yeah, for Stick Drift, this has been our final destination on everything that's metaphor, the entire spoiler cast. So enjoy the end of your January, and we'll see you in the game of the year.
See you.